Hey, this is the Amazing Spider-Man, sometimes known as the Spectacular Spider-Man. Hey, in any case, it's Spider-Man. And when I'm swinging around New York, I love to listen to the Amazing Spider Talk, mostly because they're talking about me. And, it's not J. Jonah Jameson, because when he talks about me, it's, different.
Too many who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to dangle. I'll be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon. They'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The Amazing Spider Talk. The Amazing Spider Talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the Amazing Spider
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I'm the founder and editor of AmazingSpiderTalk.com.
And I'm the mischievous Mark Giannacchio, the founder of the Chasing Amazing blog and author of 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die.
Well, thanks for joining me, Mark, for a special review roundup episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. Mark and I, we hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans and collectors as we look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
Yes, Dan, today we're going to be rounding up our Patreon reviews of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, numbers 16.HU, 17, 18, and 18.HU. That is the beginning of the Hunted storyline. We originally recorded these conversations back when the issues were first released for our Patreon audience.
Mark, when we were recording these, you were moving into your new house for a couple of the episodes. So we were lucky enough to bring on our good friend Alan Schurstel, who you should follow on Twitter. He's at Studies in Crap. It's a long story. But yes, Alan joined us on the show as your replacement. So I hope you guys enjoy Alan's commentary as much as we did and extend him a huge thank you for coming back on the show. And, I think, Mark, we can both say this. We hope to have him back on again soon.
Yeah, but not I feel like I'm Bagley getting replaced during the Bendis run on Ultimate here. It was pretty, but if I could be replaced by anyone, I'm glad it was Alan.
Yeah, Bagley came back eventually and then ended up killing that universe. So let's hope not the same thing happens here.
Okay, anyway.
Well, remember, everybody, this episode wouldn't be possible without support from our wonderful Patreon subscribers whose patronage allows us to assemble the guests we have on the show, like Alan, and do all of our research. So if you enjoy the show and want to help us continue while getting amazing bonus content like these very reviews when they were originally released on our Patreon subscriber feed and other additional episodes that we never release publicly, go check out our show notes, check out the Patreon page from there, and consider joining our team. But I've talked a lot. Let's get right to the action. It's Alan and my review of Amazing Spider-Man number 16.HU.
What's new?
Well, welcome back, Patreon subscribers. It's me, Dapper Dan Gavosden, here to talk Spider-Man with you all, and I am joined by my new co-host. Why don't you introduce yourself here, co-host?
It is me, the mischievous Mark Giannacchio, author of 348 marathons Spider-Man fans should run before they die. Actually, no, I'm joking with you. It's your like 1 or 2 time co-host filling in for Mark, who could not be here today because he's a Skrull. This is the audacious Alan Schurstel, although I'm not sure that audacious counts because it was not bestowed upon me by a member of Marvel editorial.
Well, I will bestow it on you. It's like secondhand knighting.
Well, thank you. So I am the audacious Alan Schurstel, and I am joining you here today to talk about Hunted.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Amazing Spider-Man number 16.HU because Why the hell not? We're going to talk about .hu. Should we end everything in our conversation with a .hu just so we're clear that this is not part of the mainstream line of this book?
I mean, it sounds like the end of a Hungarian web address.
Yeah, that is so true. So I guess before we get into it, how do you typically feel about these kinds of like side stories? What were you expecting from these kind of hunted or .hu issues? Were you expecting it to be in Hungarian?
Well, honestly, the side stories I find the big splashy events usually my least favorite comics these days anyway. So I do tend to skip the side stories, especially if they're not written by the creative team. I bought the side stories that were written. What was the last Spider events? Spider-Geddon. I bought the Christopher Priest ones because, I love Christopher Priest. And even though I love him, there was no need to read those stories. Those stories didn't need to be published. So I did go into this with a little bit of skepticism, but knowing that Spencer himself was writing it, and definitely lured me in. And I think that making it part of the main book, even with that HU suffix, does signal that this is a story that is actually part of this event rather than some ancillary product. And I'm glad I did read it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. They've been trying a bunch of different things over the years. Like if you remember for the Clone Conspiracy, they split it between Amazing Spider-Man and then another book called The Clone Conspiracy. And the Amazing Spider-Man book was kind of like the ancillary titles to that series. It was like the gap. So they've been playing around with this, and I don't think altogether successfully. And even this, I'm not sure how successful I feel like this is, because actually I felt like this story was super important to read for an understanding of what we ultimately got in Amazing Spider-Man number 17 and even in Amazing Spider-Man number 16.
Yeah, other than the change in art team, nothing about this story will be out of place if it's just in between the two mainline issues in the trade.
It's kind of like almost like an in-between issue inside of issue 16 of Amazing Spider-Man. It like literally takes place in the middle of that story where, we find out why Spider-Man got that spider tracer that he immediately knew was the Black Cat's, because she's always had a spider tracer, I guess.
I mean, I do acknowledge that most of the events of the story could be, captured in an editor's note or in the recap of the next issue, without really confusing any comics reader. But it stands on its own. I mean, no, it doesn't stand on its own. It deserves to be read.
Yes. And I'm surprised that there wasn't an editor's note in 16. I feel like the editor's notes have kind of taken a step back as of recent. I don't feel like they're really doing a lot of explaining, and maybe it's that Spencer's monologuing has been very, not heavy-handed, but exhaustive.
Almost old-fashioned.
Yeah, we're getting flashbacks to the previous issue that came out 2 weeks prior.
And that will be collected beside this one in the trade again.
Yeah, it's true. It's truly baffling. So speaking of Spencer's monologuing, it's the bulk of this issue is, we're following Black Cat, and we're getting Black Cat's thoughts. And one of the things that I've kind of always, found interesting about Spencer's books is he seems to change who the audience is of these monologues, even within the issue. Like you'll have Spider-Man explaining something to us and then just talking to himself, or you have this kind of like weird omniscient narrator stuff where Spider-Man will be talking about something that he can't possibly know about. How do you find, in this issue, she's like talking to us. How do you kind of find this stuff?
Well, I didn't find that distracting in this issue. I mean, Marvel comics have always been voice-driven. For a long time, it was Stan Lee's voice, imposed upon every human or alien in the universe.
We could only wish for that reality.
Yes. And, here, there's a page in here where she's musing, like the scene begins with her musing about how she never liked babysitting as a kid or as a teenager. And yeah, that you can stop and wonder, well, who is she talking to? But you know what? When Ishmael says, call me Ishmael, who is he talking to? I mean, this is just standard first person narration convention. And I am totally fine with that, even though it is a little bit different from a lot of comics history.
I barely know you, Ishmael. Let's not get so informal. So, Spencer has often said that Black Cat is one of his favorite supporting cast characters of the Spider-Man, supporting cast, and that, he got into writing Spider-Man and writing Superior Foes by pitching a Black Cat story. How do you feel his grasp on the character is?
Well, the basics are all there, and there is definitely an element of reset here after her heel turn in the Slott years. She is. I hate to say it. She is back to being awfully Catwoman-like in that she's after baubles. Her loyalties are inconstant. She will want to stop and help the defenseless, but not at the expense of not getting away with a trinket.
I agree with you, Alan. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this particular story is that it seems to retcon the Black Cat's mischaracterization, as we've often characterized it on our show, since the kind of end of the Superior run, where she had that evil heel turn. And for a long time, we had kind of bemoaned that change as something that just didn't seem in character or justified for her, even because Spider-Man tried to explain himself in a pretty logical way within the world of comics. But here, it's that whole thing is retconned to have been a reaction to her frustration and anger of having her memory of Peter's identity wiped, meaning she couldn't remember the face of a man that she loved, which almost creates a sort of almost abuse that was enacted on her by Peter, which kind of has her acting out at the beginning of this issue. And to me, this is just one in a line of things that Spencer is doing to almost retcon the motivations of characters from the Dan Slott run. And I have to say, I don't think this entirely works canonically, but I don't care because I really liked it and it made all that make a lot more sense to me. First, I want to get your feedback to that, and then I guess your thoughts on this kind of action by Spencer.
Well, first, with Black Cat, with Felicia in general, retcon is, I find retcon might be, we could call it that. But at the same time, I think you could easily talk your way into a no prize for any inconsistency in her characterization once this element that Spencer is highlighting is really, once you really start considering it. Because, it's laid out in this issue that she wasn't aware of what she had lost. She knew she had lost something. She had lost some memory, but she didn't know what it was or why it mattered to her. And so, in any of those stages during her villainy, her serious attempt to be the crime queen of New York, I think you could point to as here she didn't know why she was acting like this. So I feel like as a retcon goes, it's kind of an elegant one, and one that has this real melancholy to it that I find persuasive and interesting. And I think that it says something about Peter's character and the depth of their relationship that even though one of the hallmarks of the Black Cat Spider-Man romance, something that really separates them from Catwoman and Batwoman, is that she hated Peter Parker. She thought he was what my mom would call a schnook. Time with him was what my mom would call the pits. She only wanted to be with the Mask, which is, referenced in this issue here. But the thought that having lost her sense of him, of who Peter Parker was, and that is the triggering, the triggering incident that makes her actually go through that heel turn. That the reason she turned into a straight up villain, willing to see people die so she could get what she wants, is because she never knew Peter Parker. That's really interesting, and I kind of get the feeling that is something that Spencer might be planning to explore here.
I hope so. I love the idea that it's even doubled down on. She says it's she's constantly remembering the details of a breakup. All of this information has just flooded back into her mind, and her every moment is obsessed with these new memories that she's discovering that are painful for her. And it literally interrupts the flow of the book to put you in the mindset of her. And I love that we'll talk about the art overall, but even the paneling does this, where the paneling is like these slices that cut through the page, and you can feel kind of the pain, I feel like, even just in the layouts here. I thought this was really elegantly done.
And I don't want to jump ahead too much to the next issue, but in the next issue of Amazing, Peter goes through something slightly similar, with intrusive thoughts entering his head during a fight, during a break-in. And it's because of a mist that is being, deployed against him. And that could very well be being used against her here too. She might not truly be walking around all these years later, although in Marvel time, who knows how many years it's actually been. She might not truly be walking around all these years later lamenting this one romance. But those thoughts are coming back to her and they're hurting her. And I think that there is some emotional truth in that. Now, of course, there is always the chance that we might be coming up against this woman character who is kind of powerful, can't really be her best because she got broken up with by a man years ago routine. But I think, honestly, I think Spencer deserves the benefit of the doubt. And I think he is I'm hoping that he's setting up those themes to be interrogated and maybe even assailed rather than just falling into them. There's a lot of evidence, I think, in this issue and in the next issue that Spencer is deeply interested in the way that women in Spider-Man comics have tended to be victims or tended to be motivating plot devices for Spider-Man, or like Deb Whitman, entirely animated by their anger or their emotionality towards Spider-Man. And I feel like he's toying with those themes, maybe even a little dangerously. But after sticking with Spencer through the Cap Hydra arc that so many people assumed the worst of as soon as it was announced, I think the man's smart enough to be after something here.
I'm so glad that you're on the same page as Mark and I about that Secret Empire thing. But to this, we even got a whole issue, a few issues back of the lookups of Mary Jane, where she asserted her importance, not just as the girlfriend, but as an individual. And I think there is something truly, we're doing here. And thank God, because I feel like for almost 10 years we've had the women in Peter's life be complete pushovers, and I'm excited for some change to happen in that regard. So I want to ask you, circling back to the question I asked before, it's something I've seen on the internet, and something that I've thought a lot too, is there seems to be a lot of call it a retcon, don't call it a retcon. It is wading back into Dan Slott's run and seemingly addressing something that was unaddressed. Whether you believed in the Black Cat turn or not, I think this is emotionally far richer. And some people have kind of said that Nick Spencer's run is acting almost like a corrective to Dan Slott. I'm curious how you feel about that. Is this like a normal handing over of the torch, or do you feel like there is something a little more surgeon-like in what Spencer is doing?
Well, it's not like a normal handing over of the torch because, Dan Slott was not a torch. He was a bonfire that raged for a decade over so many anniversary issues. It's absurd. Yeah. Slott wrote more issues of this character than anyone else ever has, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And so every time a new creator takes over the franchise, like every 12 issues, somebody new writes Daredevil, and everything that just happened to Daredevil in the last year is suddenly kind of not written off, but mostly forgotten as yet another traumatic experience. And then we move on. Spencer's doing what any creator does when taking over someone else's book, which is move it in the direction this creator wants to go, attempt to change or fix or whatever you have to do with elements you might not have liked or that you want to be different in your run. But none of it feels to me like a corrective. I'm with you. Well, I don't know if you're with me on this, but where the Black Cat stuff seemed to me the biggest mistake of Slott's run. That was, I just didn't buy it. I wasn't interested in it. And I know you can't really ruin a character these days because you can always retcon anything. Spencer, honors everything that he changes. Every time Spencer changes something in Slott, he acknowledges that it really did happen, and then he starts digging out of it. And I think that is the way you should do it. I think we're at probably the most self-aware moment in comics history, and comics is the most self-aware medium that I can think of, where every status quo is guaranteed to be upended. Even casual audiences accept many iterations of each character and can keep them straight, or they understand that you don't really have to keep them straight. And everything is an homage and an upending all at once, right? So Spencer's just, he's pulling some toys out of Slott's toy box and he's putting the arms back on or doing whatever he wants with them, and that's fine. I think the things that I enjoyed most in Slott's run, like the concept of the Spider-Verse, even I haven't always enjoyed the execution of Spider-Verse stories, or Doc Ock or Anna Maria, are all alive in the continuity and being used well. And the elements that didn't need to stick around aren't sticking around.
Like Ned Leeds.
But I just want to say, I think I maybe have mentioned this to you before, Dan, but I have, like many readers, wondered at times, boy, does Spencer have some kind of problem with Slott? But I never wondered that over his treatment of Slott's inventions in ASM. I wondered that because in Spencer's own series, his series, I think it's an Image called The Fix, drawn by Steve Lieber, in the first arc, there is a very nice police officer who looks exactly like Dan Slott. And the characters in The Fix, the lead characters in The Fix, dirty cops, who in a very Spencer way are, shifty boomerang-like losers. They do everything they can to humiliate this poor cop who looks a lot like Dan Slott. And that poor cop who looks a lot like Dan Slott brings everybody donuts every day and everybody loves him.
I mean, it's pretty on point. I don't know that I feel like the similarity is as strong as you're making it sound, but I'm allowing you this as I have, and I will go with you on this journey as far as it goes, because I think that's a hilarious thing to point out, especially the donuts element of it all.
I've met Slott. I can see him bringing donuts to a retreat.
I mean, he essentially brought donuts to Spider-Man for like 10 years. It was like full of sugar, but not really that full of substance. Well, anyway, let's talk about this book. So we get this kind of switcheroo with Hammerhead, where he's kind of guiding her and, his former boss. And he's like, I'm going to give you all this art if you go and break my old boss, the Owl, out of containment on this ship in the harbor of New York. And we know that this ship is the very same one we saw in the previous issue 16 with all the Craven clones, which I think the less said about the better. And, she breaks in there only to find out it's a trap. What did you think about this kind of characterization of Hammerhead?
I thought it was very strong. And, my one issue when I was reading this was, well, Felicia's being set up. Doesn't she see it? But Spencer, who I think one place we absolutely have to give Spencer a lot of love is his dialogue, especially his dialogue among villains. And he has Hammerhead flatter her and her abilities. And that's why she doesn't stop to think, maybe I'm being set up. And I thought that was really smart. And of course, you can't trust this guy. And he gave us a reason for why she would.
The best thing about Hammerhead in this issue for me is the idea that Taskmaster and Black Ant are, squibbling over whether or not he's an animal-themed villain because his name is the name of a shark. I feel like we get one of these jokes in every issue from Spencer that's just a knockdown, amazing joke. I still think the king of all of that is the Robbie Robertson in the vibrating chair, but this one is in good contention for me. How have you kind of taken to Spencer's humor?
Well, I mean, I've read a lot of Spencer before this run, and I mean, there's no doubt about it. He is a terrifically funny writer, to the point where sometimes it can get in the way. The Fix is a very, very funny series, but And his Ant-Man is a very, very funny series, but and his obviously his superior foes as well. But at times after he's taken over ASM, I found that ASM is a little inconsistent in whether or not it is a funny book like Ant-Man or a relatively serious book that occasionally has a great joke, the way Spider-Man comics have tended to be most of my life. And so, during that Thieves Guild arc, it all just felt like, if these characters were in like a Marvel Next, junior title, like maybe I could believe this Thieves Guild plot.
Yeah.
But, in a mainline book, it just felt both like the Thieves Guild is too impossibly powerful and too inconsequential, and it's all kind of used to set up the Shaggy Dog joke where none of the adult superheroes know to use a cell phone like Miss Marvel does. Like, it just felt like the comedy was getting in the way. In this issue, in the clone issue that you just referenced, it really feels to me like the humor is just dead on. Like, the characters are funny when there is a reason for them to be funny, or when something naturally presents itself for them to be funny, and then they're very funny. It's like this is like the textbook example of the college writing class, edict to kill your darlings. Like, only keep in the best ones, and then it works.
I think you're right about the tone stuff, because I do think he has trouble kind of mixing the tones up a little bit. Like, Superior Foes from the very start was like clearly just kind of a comedy book with a bit of of Ocean's 11 mixed in to it. Like, it was always funny and always non sequiturs. But and issues that land on that line in Amazing Spider-Man have worked for me, like say the Spider Jeopardy.
Yes, I love those issues.
Yeah, but when you mix the two tones, like the Thieves Guild stuff, I do feel like it kind of it doesn't always land right. And so, like, yeah, this issue to me was like like we got one good joke in this, and that was like really strong for me. And then you get less like jokey stuff, but more kind of like smart character stuff, like when Felicia is referring to opening up the lizard cage by like comparing it to how she steals Fabergé eggs. And It's like that got a smile out of me, but it wasn't going for a guffaw. And those are details I really like.
And I'm not going to pretend it's easy to write a good joke or easy to write something funny. It's not. But it is easy for Nick Spencer to do that. Okay? And what's also just as satisfying for a reader, and I'm just so heartened to see in this issue and the last issue that he seems very aware of this, is that kind of really smart setup, really smart character payoff. We call like a good action bit or a good twist in a story, we often call it a gag, because they are related impulses. And I love seeing Spencer investing himself in that kind of gag as much as in, wouldn't it be funny if Boomerang was in his underwear on the couch?
Yeah, which we've certainly gotten plenty of.
I'm sorry, is it Boomerang? I always forget his name.
It's Boomerang.
Oh, it is Boomerang. Okay.
Yeah.
So who's the guy who can throw anything, who always kills Daredevil's girlfriends?
Bullseye.
Bullseye.
Yeah. Different people, but I guess somewhat related.
Yes.
So we get this kind of like flashback during this kind of heist with Felicia that we come back to several times throughout, and it involves, the spider tracer that I was referencing earlier, but it's set up in a very different way that really kind of caught me off guard at first before it's ultimately revealed what it is. And it's this supposed like proposal between Peter and Felicia, where she kind of comes out of the bathroom of Peter's, classic old apartment where he's got to go in through the bathroom skylight, which I mean, when I lived in New York, I was always killing for a bathroom skylight. I don't know about you.
Who is his real estate rep? Why have we not got that issue?
With women in bikinis that hang out on the roof too. Like that was the dream, right? So, she kind of comes in out of the bathroom, and Peter's sitting there on the bed, with what looks like he's going to propose to her. And immediately I recoiled at this, because I was like, that's a big beat to not really have ever heard about before. And ultimately reveals to be, just he's giving her a spider tracer and grabbed one of her jewelry boxes, which I thought was a nice bit of characterization. But I still kind of like recoil at the idea that Peter would so cavalierly present it this way, especially after, at this point in the timeline, he had just recently proposed to Mary Jane and been turned down by her. I don't know. How do you feel about this moment?
Well, all of that rattled through my head as well. Just it felt wrong for Peter. It felt wrong. I mean, it felt wrong for the Peter that was in those issues written in the early 80s. It might not be wrong for Nick Spencer's Peter, but Nick Spencer's Peter wasn't in those issues. And, I understand that often, creators inject what we know now emotionally about the character, back into the past. That's how we get, the great, the great issue where Mary Jane and Peter walk around Central Park in issue 258, and talk about their past.
The very issue that you joined us on the show to talk about.
Oh, I think it was, yes. But here, we're getting this through Black Cat's perspective. It is her flashback, and she might be infected with mists that bring out all your worst fears and doubts. So there's a whole lot going on there. But still, as presented, Peter's cavalier dopery of presenting this, in kind of a proposal pose doesn't make much sense to me. To me, it's the most sour beat in the issue. And also, it doesn't make much sense to me that she would care so much. Because at this point was there a point in that relationship where she was not annoyed at Peter Parker?
Yeah, there was a point where she kind of found out about it. There's even a scene that I like to joke around with Mark a lot about in Spectacular Spider-Man, where she's in the hospital and introduces Peter as Spider-Man to her mother, of all things. So
okay, I forgot about that.
There's a certain amount of courting going on, and to this book credit, Peter does call her out on it. He's like, I didn't think you would care because just a few weeks ago, you didn't want to even know who I was. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a little bit embellished that she would care so much about it. There is a bit of exaggerated, reminiscing about just how romantic their relationship was. But then again, if you go back and read those Spectacular Spider-Man issues where she's kind of the co-star, I recoil at those issues because I do find them so heavy-handed about their romance. So, I think it's there is enough to support this in some regard.
I think there could be, and I feel like this goes back to a question you asked earlier about narration in these comics, especially, from Spencer, in that, he might not obey every rule of, every creative writing class rule of who you're addressing as your audience. His first person narration tends to change from present tense to past tense. It seems to change who it's addressing a lot of the time, but he does obey, the basic rule of perspective that this is Felicia's story. This is Felicia's memory. So we are denied the 2 panels of Peter, in a panic, grabbing that jewelry box and then thinking, oh, wait, this is a dumb idea. And he would have done those. I mean,
yes.
Peter would have done that. But it's all it would take to sell me on this is seeing those 2 panels, and Spencer's fidelity to, the structure, the narrative structure of his story denies us those panels.
And maybe it's meant to be awkward and painful because that is what Felicia's experiencing, as you're saying, is the kind of, she's remembering the pain of it. You know what I mean? And so for us to feel that way, maybe that should be the reaction.
And then I very much like the beat a little bit later where Peter himself is really surprised that, oh, wait, you would be into that?
He's like, oh, maybe there's an opportunity here.
Yeah, exactly.
He is so quick to rush to marriage. For all the complaints about Peter getting married, it seems like that's his go-to for any long-term relationship that he's in. I mean, all it takes is going back to his first, 30 issues of dating Betty, where marriage was on the table constantly as a teenager,
Yeah. And we all know nothing works better for a superhero vigilante than marrying a cat-themed burglar.
No, of course not. It's not like that'll suddenly get ended at the last second.
I gotta say, though, this Black Cat, I'm a little confused sometimes, what she's feeling moment to moment, although she's telling us. I'm a little confused sometimes why she's feeling what what she's feeling moment to moment, but she's telling us. But I don't know that that's Spencer's fault. That is just the character's deeply convoluted history.
Yeah. So did this final moment of her, she could leave and call the Avengers or go back and save Billy Connors. Did this final moment of her having that heel turn where she's like, I will go back and save him. Did that land for you?
Oh, absolutely. And, it didn't land so much as have the deeply satisfying sense of a tragedy starting.
Yeah. I love the bit that the Black Ant has been there the whole time. And he's like, I can't believe you did this. Even he's surprised and kicks the crap out of her, in a panel.
Oh, and the panels, the small panels of him leaping toward her are so powerfully rendered, just beautifully designed.
Well, that's a great place to transition to talking about the art in this book. We've mentioned it briefly. Eben Coelho, this guy who's never worked on a Spider-Man book before, and I don't even know what books he's done prior to this. It's not someone that's, I recognize the name straight out. But, in my mind, this may be the best artist debut on a non-main issue I've ever seen. Where is this guy? This guy should be a AAA artist locked on this book. At least that's how much I enjoyed the art in this title.
He did some Venom stuff, right?
It's possible,
but
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, man. I mean, this book looks great. I mean, I do take some minor exception. I don't know. As I'm reading this, I'm wondering, should Black Cat really look like she's in a fetish magazine? Should she?
He wouldn't be the first.
But then she's Black Cat wearing this leather cat suit, and she's always been drawn like this. And here she's at least drawn with some power and some dignity. Now the Greg Land cover,
I was just going to get
much more
to that.
Objectionable. Good God. But I just got to say, I do think I personally prefer Ramos's Black Cat, who we'll see in the next issue.
Sure.
But that's also because, well, you know me, Dan, something bothers me that HBO really thinks I need to be truly turned on to watch Game of Thrones. And something about that kind of bothers me here. It's guys, I'm buying this book because I want to enjoy these characters and their story and see some spectacular art, not because I really need some kind of fetish material.
I completely agree with you on all of that stuff. I kind of moved past it with Black Cat because it's been true for so long of the character. It's almost a part of the character. It's not quite as in canon as, say, the White Queen, who literally got a boob job in the context of Marvel Comics to look the way she does. And if that's part of her owning her character, I do think it's a regressive step for Black Cat, because I thought the new Humberto Ramos costume design for her that we got in the Dan Slott run was a step in the right direction, in that it was more clothed and more cat designed, but we're back to this now, and so, at least he's consistent, I'll say. But beyond her, I thought that this Peter was really beautifully rendered, and I've not seen an artist shake up layouts like this in Nick Spencer's run in such an exciting way. We got pages that are half slashes of stuff with panels that are weaving in and out of others.
And those really pages that are half slashes, it really feels like one idea is interrupted by another. I mean, it feels like a schism in the moment. I mean, they're really powerful.
Yeah, and I wonder how much Spencer had to do with that kind of, suggesting of the page layouts, because, Ryan Ottley's layouts are so rigid. I love Ottley's stuff, but if there's anything I'd like him to play with, it's panel design. He's very much in the Ditko school of 9 panel pages and stuff. I mean, his Invincible is incredible, but there was, short of giant splash pages, it was always very structured, rigid paneling. And so seeing a book open up like this, while still maintaining structure, I thought was really exciting.
Oh, absolutely. Also, am I crazy, or does he draw the Black Cat as 5'2"?
Oh, yes. She is quite short. Yeah.
She is quite short. But, oh, man, the last page is just so beautiful.
It's like he finally got a chance to draw Spidey, in action in this book. And so you get this big, splashy Spidey on the last page.
And the layout really invites the eye across the page, following the motion of the spider tracer, and the way that comes out of, the previous page's last panel where Felicia's lying on the ground and looking up and she sees like the little glinting light above her. It's just beautiful. It's just this very, very cinematic, but not in a way that feels derivative of movies. It is its own thing, and it is persuasive and exciting, and it really left me, I'm going to use the word, Dan, pumped.
Yeah, agreed. Like that, I was excited about that tracer, even though I ultimately knew what, resulted from it. So let's talk about grades. We do grades on this show. I know it's film critics. It can be annoying to assign a grade to something. Where does this sit for you on the A to E scale?
Well, you don't know where previous Spencer issues sit for me because I don't have to go on record every week and a half or every 2 weeks like you folks do. But this is a solid B, which is very good for the run.
And I'm going to go with a B+ on this. This got me more excited than issue 16 for Hunted. And that's thrilling. It's fun to head into an event with a lot of enthusiasm.
It is, and I've just got to say, I entirely disagree with you and Mark about the Craven and all his clones routine. I thought that was so sick and so interesting, and truly the maddest Craven has been in a long time. And I am totally happy to discard all of the family drama of Grim Hunt and just roll with that nutsoid idea.
It's super heavy metal, so I'll give it that. It's fun. I just wasn't used to the way in which it was rolled out.
Yeah, I'm saying as having read the 2 further issues that you guys had when you discussed it.
Sure. All right. Well, perfect. All right. Thanks, Alan, for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
All right, Dan, you two sounded great. I'm not the least bit put off by being replaced. Anyway, thanks to all our patrons at Patreon, because without them, we would have never gotten that awesome review with guest host Alan Schurstel. But fear not, listeners at home, there's more where that came from, including me getting replaced some more in this review of Amazing Spider-Man number 17. Yo, what up? It's your boy Ginocchio. All right.
We're thrilled to have you here because we're going to start talking about Hunted today. And by we, I mean me, Dapper Dan Gavosden, and my good friend and new co-host. Introduce yourself, new co-host.
Well, hello, I am the mischievous Mark Ginocchio, author of 349 wheat cakes to eat if you're a Spider-Man fan.
Mark, are you doing one of your voices again?
I'm sorry. I'm actually the audacious Alan Schurstel, here filling in for Mark Ginocchio, who has been called back to his home planet in its time of need.
It makes so much sense now. Everything is lining up. Mark's an alien. I got it. This is all coming together. Well, today, Alan, we are going to be talking about the start of the Hunted arc. If it hadn't already started 2 issues prior, it's Amazing Spider-Man number 17. We're getting straight into it. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, because it seems so pertinent to this story, where does stories, other famous Craven stories like Craven's Last Hunt and Grim Hunt sit for you heading into this event? Are you a fan of those stories?
Oh, man, this is one of those topics that most people in the world, when they know me, just know, don't get me started on. Just don't invite me to talk about the great run of Spider-Man comics that came out when I was reading between the ages of 10 and 14, which covered the DeFalco Friends run, Jim Owsley's takeover of the book, the rise of Peter David and the death of Jean DeWolf, which I still think should have been an essential, you dopes. And Craven's Last Hunt, of course, is the the bomb that was dropped on Spider-Man then. I had not been reading what's going on, with Frank Miller or with the Dark Knight, and all that stuff. So the death of Jean DeWolf was pretty shocking to me. But then it was only like maybe 18 months later, tops, that we start getting this crazy story, this incredibly dark, crazy story that, I must have read many, many times. Nude Craven wandering around butchering William Blake poems is just in my DNA. And I do feel very strongly. Well, first off, I have to tell you that, no joke, in early college, I'm in like some literature class, like British poetry class. And I literally was surprised when we finally read Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, by William Blake. Because I actually thought it was Spider, Spider with a Y. Why, J.M. DeMatteis? Why? I loved that story, and I was shaken by that story, like legitimately shaken by that story in a way I've very rarely been shaken by a comic story, because it just seemed to go so much further than comics that I had read, and certainly Spider-Man comics, ever had before. The situation so much more dire, the situation so much more grim, the outcome so much more in doubt, and it took over all 3 books. It was crazy. There wasn't like an ancillary Web of Spider-Man story to cheer you up, where he, working for Look magazine, goes to West Virginia and frees some children from some bad guys. It just was it. He was dead. So I love that story. Now, Grim Hunt was a very good story that I enjoyed quite a bit, but I don't remember any details of it. And I've got to say, I've never enjoyed more than that any of the Craven's Last Hunt throwbacks or homages or sequels.
Soul of the Hunter?
Certainly not. In fact, now I have a kind of a strained relationship with Craven's Last Hunt. As much as I love that original story, I feel the same way about it that I feel about, say, the Dark Knight movie or Frank Miller's work, which is, this was so good. Or Watchmen even. Like, this was so good. This was so wonderful. And every imitation, everything that this influenced is garbage. So I love it, and I bemoan everything that it wrought.
Yeah, so that's really interesting that you bring that up, because it is true, and it's part of what Mark and I kind of wrestled with in our Essentials, and the death of Jean DeWolf, is that, like, they're very atypical stories. Like, they're dark in a way that Spider-Man rarely, if ever, gets, and whenever it tries to, it just feels wrong for the title. It's the kind of thing, it's like, if you take a shot at the king, you better not miss.
Exactly. If you're going to break the rules, you have to be twice as good as anybody else. And part of what made those stories so powerful, I'm sorry, I am totally interrupting what you were saying, but I think this might be an interesting point. Please forgive me.
Go for it.
They remind me very much of, say, like Indiana Jones and a Temple of Doom, which came out around the same time. And that and Gremlins, were so traumatic for families that, families were very upset. And Steven Spielberg called up Jack Valenti and said, we need a new rating, harder than PG, but softer than R. Those movies came out at a time where the rules were not clearly established for how far you could go, and to suddenly go further than you had without really testing it or thinking it or in a medium that was thought of as for kids, was truly shocking. I know these stories, Craven's Last Hunt, Death of Jean DeWolf, are not shocking compared to Born Again or compared to Watchmen, but coming, in like off a spinner rack, at the little grocery store in my Kansas hometown, they were terrifying. And I'm always interested and fascinated in these moments in like popular culture where the rules aren't clear and where the norms and boundaries are being tested, and most of the work that has come since, that has been derivative of Craven's Last Hunt has come out when the rules are clear and has just felt like, more of whatever era it's from than like a true sequel.
It does thrill me that the rules can be broken and people still react to them. Maybe not in the way that I want them to react, but like Superior Spider-Man and killing off Peter Parker and getting the reaction that it did meant that people are still invested in the world of this character, and they don't.
Same with Secret Invasion.
Yeah. So like
Or whatever that was called.
That's thrilling to me.
Secret Empire.
Yeah, that people can be still shocked by this stuff, whereas like old cynics, like I'd say myself, and I'm say likely you. Like, we know that Spider-Man's coming back, but we're still along for the ride. We understand the game a little bit. So let's get into that in this issue. I thought that the first page of this issue really set the tone for what, Spencer is doing here. We get a darker, more devious-looking version of Humberto Ramos's pencils with this kind of naked Kraven bathed in mists and just, like, glaring out at the audience. And then we have Joe Caramagna's letters delivering the exactly identical lettering from Kraven's Last Hunt. Not to mention the other parallels of the story. Like, do you feel like we're going to be able to tap back into that kind of, Kraven's Last Hunt feeling? I mean, look, Ramos is no Mike Zeck, but, I don't know. Are you ready to get back into that headspace, or do you think Spencer's got his own unique thing?
I think Spencer's got his own unique thing. I think those first pages are a bang-up homage. They're very strong. But the focus of this story right now is not necessarily Kraven. There's so much more going on. There's so many other elements. There's the clone kid. There's Arcade. There's all this complexity with the lizard and the lizard's kid and Black Cat. And it's just, for a 6-issue story, Kraven's Last Hunt was pretty streamlined. It was the will of the hunter versus his prey. And here there's so many more elements, and this most dangerous game element, of everybody being hunted for sport, that no, I don't think we're going to get anything like Kraven's Last Hunt. But Spencer is smart enough to, ground it in the emotion and the terror of that original story, and then do his own thing. And as a matter of fact, as we talked about, last time, the other time I filled in when we talked about the HU issue, Dan, Spencer is we didn't talk about this specifically, but I came close to making this point. Spencer is not DeMatteis. Spencer has never spent time reading his DSM-4. Spencer is not obsessed with a Dr. Kafka. Spencer is a very, very different writer, and he's after something, I think, very different from Kraven's Last Hunt. And I like that. I like that Spencer in this issue, in the last 2 issues, has these very dark moments, has these terrifying situations, and yet his kind of Spencer lightness, and his joy in inventing, surprises, courses through it.
It's a more grounded and less silly version of Slott. In my mind, like, he's more invested in character, but still can understand the kind of like silliness inherent in Spider-Man, and a silliness that never appears in Kraven's Last Hunt.
Exactly.
Although here we get maybe the most macabre thing I've ever seen in a comic, which is that Kraven's home decor includes the coffin where he committed suicide, just hanging out there laying open.
But that's a perfect Spencer detail. And he has the incredibly dark, macabre idea that DeMatteis might have gone with. But in Spencer, it's knowingly funny. But I think the difference between this issue and a lot of previous Spencer issues on ASM is it's not like ribbing you funny.
No.
It's funny, and he thinks it's funny, but you can read that and just be chilled by it too.
Well, there's real stakes in it, which is something that I feel like has been missing for a lot of Spencer's run. We've never had a true villain for Spider-Man to go up against. And, we can find Kraven deeply silly. He's the guy that had, like, laser nipples that come out, that came out of his costume. But he's still a threat. And so, you can laugh at the coffin, but still feel like this guy could kill Spider-Man at any moment.
It's like that level of awareness of Kraven's silliness, and yet also how that silliness is part of why he's such a threat, reminds me a little bit of Slott's, mastery of Octopus's character. Like, Slott knew exactly what was funny about Octopus and exactly what was terrifying about Octopus, and he tied them together tightly all the time.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting that. One of the things I wanted to note here is that, like, in the beginning of the story, Craven references that he can only be killed again by the spider, which is something that came out of, like, Grim Hunt, where, like, because he was brought back using the spider's blood, only the spider could kill him, and you're getting into all that weird totemic stuff with Spider-Man that some people like to touch and other people don't, and I feel like Spencer has kind of, hinted at that here and there, and we've kind of speculated that this Shush character might be related to all of that. And, even I've been confused by this, but at the end of the Scarlet Spider run featuring Kane, that spell was apparently undone, but here it's back again, and honestly, if it breaks continuity, I'm kind of okay with it, because I think this is a really cool wrinkle to add into this story, that, like, Spider-Man is going to be cornered in this Under the Dome scenario. And if his only way out is to kill this guy and break his moral code, I think ultimately that's where we're headed, that kind of conclusion. And I'm hoping that Spencer is going to use this to push the character in a new direction, because that's been a story that's been handled a bunch of times, but like never in this kind of so direct way. It seems like the perfect scenario to set that up.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm with you. That seems to be the hook, and that's a really powerful hook. So powerful that it's just kind of mentioned, twice in this 35-page issue or however long it is, that has so many other moving parts. And yet it is what is seizing me most about this story. But I don't know about the continuity. I didn't read Scarlet Spider. When I looked back at Grim Hunt before recording this podcast, I couldn't follow a lot of what was going on in that involving Kane and everybody's status, whatever that was. But I don't think you need any of that for this to work. This is Craven. Craven is out of his mind. Why preening, self-regarding, nude, mist-huffing Craven, of course he's going to decide only the spider can kill me. He doesn't need any spell to do that. It's respect.
Yeah, that's so totally true. And look, don't feel bad about not reading The Scarlet Spider. Even the editors didn't read that book. If you read the final issue of that series, it's like there's a spelling error on every panel. So, like, you are not alone.
Now, I forget, do I need to know about Craven's offspring, his original offspring from Grim Hunt, to follow this story?
Well, most of them are dead.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, I mean, even in like the issue 16, it showed him killing another one of them. I think maybe his daughter is still bouncing around out there somewhere, but like...
Oh, I kind of liked her.
Yeah,
she's the Ivanka Craven.
Yeah, yeah. We'll find out if she's married to Jared Kushner or something at some point. Some kind of like self-preening preteen.
I'm sure there's some Spider-Ham version of Jared Kushner, but I can't think of it right now. In the original Spider-Man comics, Spider-Ham comics, Peter Porker met Barbara Mandrill. That's how 80s they were. They were so 80s.
Well, you mentioned to me before we even started this conversation that one of the things you enjoyed the most is the obligatory web swinging while monologuing bit, which is probably the closest to J.M. DeMatteis that we get in this issue, which is like 2 pages of just deep thought from Spider-Man. And
it's just beautiful. I mean, if I were ever like you to like be tempted to buy like original Spider-Man art, it would not be pages where he's, beating up a villain. It would be his swinging around, musing about his problems. The artist always gets to just go nuts drawing a city and drawing swinging, and they're so exciting. And ever since Marvel's cut a page or two from the stories, we've really lost a lot of those. Slott didn't have time to do those. And I just love Spencer's habit of recapping everything for a page or two, and then he finally pairs it up with the classic Spider-Man swing-along. What is it Mark always mentions? The sad faces of guilt.
The floating heads of guilt.
We didn't need them in this issue, although Ned Leeds might have been up there.
Ned and Flash both get floating heads of guilt in this issue, which is appropriate because Ned was a floating head of guilt in Craven's Last Hunt because he had died just, a few moments prior. So we're bookending this with Ned being dead in both in both issues.
Well, and we're bookending all of those both of those previous Craven stories we've talked about, in that, like, even in Grim Hunt, Spider-Man is sick. He has the swine flu, I believe, in that one. You know, he's never at his best when Craven's around. I always wonder if Craven, like, steals his Airborne before.
And it always manifests itself with, like, the pounding drums in his head and all these things. There's a lot of stuff like this in the issue that I think is really great.
And it's really potent in that this issue is 10 pages longer than usual. Absolutely helps so much. This story has room to breathe. The evil jungle mists can seep into our lungs.
Right. There's not just one panel of them. There are like 4 pages of them seeping into Spider-Man, beautifully rendered. So let's talk about Black Cat, because we get this scene with Black Cat where she's in this kind of like South by Southwest, what am I even saying? Oh my God, the Hitchcock movie.
Oh, North by Northwest.
North by Northwest. It's that kind of year where South by Southwest sweeps into the brain. North by Northwest, like a style apartment, some sexy caper that she's on, which is appropriate for Black Cat, and except her roommate is a lizard boy. And, we've got Craven coming in his suit, and, she's captured, and he kind of admits that, like, they're bait, and she kind of balks at this. What did you think about this scene, like, and the whole, like, women as bait thing, and I guess Craven's motivations?
Well, I believe we've probably talked about this when you have been nice enough to have me on the show before, but, the avowed reason I actually said out loud to a friend that I stopped reading Spider-Man, and then by extension, all comics, for about 10 or 12 years when I was 14 or 15, was that Mary Jane kept getting kidnapped all the time. Spider-Man had just married her, Michelini had taken over the writing, and it just felt like an infinitely dumber book than what I had been reading before that. And I've always very sensitive to this kind of thing. And as we talked about on the other episode that I was on recently, talking about the HU issue, I really have some faith in Spencer, partially because of that great series of scenes he had done with MJ and the support group. And, I know that those kind of descended into jokey cameos, but there was a real emotional, core to them that I thought had some resonance. And okay, there's another thing later in this issue. I'll go ahead and jump ahead to that too.
Yeah.
That I think needs to be considered when thinking about this is Felicia bait routine that is going on right here. When Peter is huffing these jungle mists and starts having these visions of Mary Jane in trouble. The first vision is just of her sitting on the couch, like eating popcorn or something.
Yeah.
And then, with no evidence from the outside world, he becomes convinced that she is in terrible danger. And I think he's wrong. I think that's just the way his brain works. I think Spencer is really jerking us around with that, luring us to believe we're getting yet another one of those standard stories where Mary Jane is going to be kidnapped and Peter can barely save her. But instead, he's showing that this is like, just like traumatic loop that Peter's brain is stuck in. Meanwhile, we've got this Black Cat routine where she is told that she is bait. I find that odd for a couple reasons. One, Spencer's very smart, and he doesn't need her to be bait for the story to work. There's every reason she could be in Central Park at the end with all the other animal-themed characters. Spider-Man already has the Connors boy to track down, so she's redundant bait. And then her furious response to it, I love the panels Ramos draws of her, screaming at him about, how insulting this is that she is bait. I think the very idea of her being bait is going to be upended, interrogated, examined, lampooned in this arc. And I think that it's being set up. There's a very good chance it's being set up that she's going to be the one who actually kills Craven.
I think that's a really excellent point. I mean, I think it's reinforced by the fact that if Peter were to try to save Mary Jane, he's likely in this bubble for good in this story. So, like, narratively, that doesn't make sense. And, the last time we really interrogated in a really full-throated way Peter's fears about Mary Jane was really Craven's last hunt, right? Like, they just got married, and he got buried alive, and the whole issue, he's obsessing over her and, being left alone, and she's wondering where he is, and she has no, real agenda in that story. And this could be totally different. I'm not saying she's going to find her way into this story, but I think you're right. I think maybe this is a way to examine that trauma that Peter went through and to heal their relationship from his side, where she went through the lookups. He's going to have to get over that immediate reaction. So I think you're right about this. I think it's a way to raise the stakes. And the ultimate reveal will be that these stakes were completely artificial.
Well, and that is where, I'm hoping, and again, I'm basing all this on my trust in Spencer. He's a very smart writer who is aware of every stinky dumb trope and is always guessing what you're going to guess. And I also, as we talked about on the other show, have a lot of respect for how he handled, that potentially explosive, well, I guess it was truly explosive because people were so upset, Secret Empire story, which was handled with so much more thoughtfulness and nuance and just interesting ideas than the coverage of that story would ever make you suspect.
I mean, I made you go out and read Secret Empire Omega, which I think is one of the...
Oh, that was spectacular. That was one of the best things Spencer has written, and he's written some excellent things.
Yeah. So, I agree with you. I'm really excited about seeing where this goes. And I think...
But can I just say that at the same time, even if he is critiquing, assailing, putting a nail in the coffin of these kind of story beats, it still bums me out having to go through these kind of story beats again.
Yeah. But I do see this in we talked about in our last issue. I see this in a longer line of Spencer being corrective about the comics industry, and not just Dan Slott. And I feel like he needs to get through this before he can truly do his own take on Spider-Man. I think that if my theory about Shush holds true, that it is a way for him to bring back the Spider marriage and finally put it to rest. I feel like this is the guy who admittedly read every issue of Spider-Man before, getting onto this book. And, but he's so much more knowledgeable about comics than even just that. That his idea for Captain America was to do what he did to him. This is a guy that wants to address these things head on. And I really feel like he's okay, if I can this is all set up to his ultimate long game story, which is the Shush story, which I think is going to make Mary Jane and Peter face that marriage head on so that we can all get past it. We've got to get past this so that Spider-Man can once again regain his place in pop culture with no caveats. And I think part of what you're saying is part of that. And these are all steps to repairing the Peter MJ thing one moment at a time.
I agree with all of that, and I hope you're right in that that's where all this is going, although I don't care if the marriage comes back or not, whatever.
No, me neither, but we have to address it.
But you're right in that Spencer is, as we saw with Black Cat, continually diving into these very thorny, contested patches of spider history and trying to plant something there. It's like he's going into earth that has been salted and scorched where nothing should ever grow again, and he's dropping his Spencer Miracle-Gro on it, and he's going to make something green out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I don't know why I'm going to plants in an animal park.
Even the JJ stuff, right? Here's a really problematic thing. JJ knows Pete's identity. Well, let's do something new with that. Yeah. I feel like he's very much... He's Mr. Band-Aid, and
and that's I really appreciate that he respects the readers enough to actually engage with the specifics of the botched, confused continuity, rather than just asserting in the story, this is how it is now. How many times has Rhino shown up or Sandman shown up and we're told, nope, he's a villain again with no explanation?
Yeah.
Spencer will not do that, but he's also not necessarily going to let dwelling upon those thorny continuity issues slow down a story.
No,
it's a tricky balance.
And he'll throw them aside when he doesn't want to use them. The Ned Leeds thing is a perfect example. That was rife with 20 stories of potential. Ned Leeds is back, and he's got the memories about the Hobgoblin stuff, but we don't even delve into it. He's just gone.
I'm not going to tell Betty all this. My God.
So let's get into Craven, back into Craven again here. One of the things I'm still, and I'm waiting to see how it shakes up is, I'm still not entirely clear on Craven's motivations. And granted, it's like the first issue, if you want to call it that, of this thing. I don't quite get like how all of these various arms all come together. Like, what is he doing with these hunters? Why does he care about these villains in animal costumes? And how does that tie into getting Spider-Man to kill him? I'm not sure what his game plan is. And it's bad for a villain to tell me their game plan straight out of the front. But I just don't know how they work together. And I don't know if that's a negative, but it makes me feel like, how is this all fitting together? What does he actually want?
I feel like that is a concern that is outside of the story itself. That does not mean it's not a legitimate concern. I have it too. Yet we're so used to stories spinning out of control, especially stories that have extra tie-in issues.
Yeah.
That, I'm a little worried that all of these elements might not cohere. Craven's done goofy stuff before, so I can entirely buy the putting a shield around Central Park and taking over the Plaza Hotel routine. Great, but why would he do that when, the story that this issue pays homage to in its first pages is the rawest, purest me versus him.
Right. And I wonder if maybe some of these things are the new Vermin element, which is kind of the weird offshoot of Craven's Last Hunt that for me has never really felt truly at home in that story. I never cared about Vermin. And I wonder if there's he's been replaced with these hunters and the monsters of the world, as it put it in the last Craven's Last Hunt.
I just can't believe there's still people in the Marvel Universe who are like, oh, sure, I'll put on a crazy suit and take a gun and go fight some bad guys. Come on, join the Wild Pack or something. What are you doing?
You mean you wouldn't put on a suit that had facial hair printed on the front of it?
I want to know who these people are, but I guess that's possibly the issue here, is that these elements aren't really being teased. We're not being promised that there's a lot more here. It's just all kind of happening.
I'm still intrigued to see where it goes.
Yeah.
I think it's going to make allies and enemies alike in the face of this hunt, and that will be interesting. All I want is a Spider-Man the Gibbon team up. Which one of the .hu issues promised, and I don't know if you noticed, but there is a head of Gibbon floating in the background of one of the spreads here, and I was like, there it is. We haven't seen it in over 500 issues, but the Gibbon, or more than that even, I guess 600 or 700 issues, the Gibbon makes his return.
I cannot wait. When I look at the solicits for what's coming up, and I usually don't do that, but I did that for these podcasts, I got to say, I'm excited. This is the most excited I've been since the first Spencer issue.
Yes, I agree. I think this is probably the best issue since the first Spencer issue as well. So let's talk about this big brouhaha that happens. We've kind of danced around this. We're calling him Craven Jr. on the show. And you suspect maybe the Black Cat kills Craven. I am in the camp that Craven kills Craven.
Oh, sure.
At the end of the story, because how do you one-up Craven's Last Hunt? The only way that Craven can really prove himself worthy is to kill himself again as his younger self. I can't believe I just said that. But it's comics, people.
That's the only way.
Yeah. Well, look. Craven killed himself before. We're going to just make that literal, and he's going to kill himself. But what do you think about this big brouhaha fight in the I guess the sewers?
Oh, well, I loved how it was drawn. It was, a good, exciting first round new villain. Spider-Man is sick. There's creepy mists going around fight. And, the thing I liked in it, other than, the art, which, is just, I love Ramos's skinny Spider-Man. I just love him. But what I really enjoyed in this was at one point in it, Spider-Man turns on his Popeye swallowing the spinach, I'm indefatigable, I will never stop routine, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. And usually he only pulls that out like when it's going to work. He pulls it out against Firelord. He pulls it out against Juggernaut. And here, no, it's just not doing it.
Yeah.
But for a page, it looks like it might.
And he's interrupted by his like doubts about MJ, which is interesting.
Yeah, and the way the scripting on that was so strong. The letter panels that are just one word of a continuing message across. Oh, it's so good. Those letter boxes, and I mean, I gotta say this. There's a moment in this. I know that this fight, structurally speaking, is the first clash between this hero and this villain in this story. So the hero's gonna lose. Like, I know that as soon as the fight starts. There's no way around that. Everything is set up for that. It was still tense.
I agree. I mean, I think maybe like artificially inflated by the MJ imagery, which is really shocking and cryptic enough for you to go like, oh no, what is actually happening here? But then, like, you know, the brutal nature of the conclusion of this fight is, you know, these big sucker punch panels, you know, with literal sucker punches on them. Rarely has the book been that brutal towards Spider-Man. And I don't know if I appreciated it, but it's the stakes are raised even further. You know, this guy's doubts are going to creep in and allow these villains to manhandle him.
And Spencer's truly powerful dialogue is really an assist there when Craven Jr. or Craju says, that, you're just a dying man.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the ones that, I mean, it made me eye roll, the I was born in that darkness quote.
Oh, I loved it. I love that so much. That's just beautiful. That's pure Craven nonsense.
It's like Bane.
I mean, I'm not going to say it felt parodic because it's not. That's why I think Spencer's at his best when there's an element of parody there, but it does not feel overtly parodic. And, you know, that's just the kind of corny nonsense, the depressed, nihilistic, cloned Craven would say. You know, I'm so tough, I huff the mists that make you see your worst fears. Like, you know, I call up my man Mysterio and just have him send me over 6 of these a week. we got Mysterio drug bike service in my town. Bring it over. I mean, it's corny. It is corny. I think you're supposed to roll your eyes at it in a way, but I just thought that was wonderful.
I love that Spidey bashes him with like a pipe that he pulls out of the wall, which is literally what he did to Vermin when he was fighting him in the sewer.
Oh, wow.
It seems like a very intentional reference to me. And I think you and I are kind of coming down the same place on these myths. Like, they want to tease you with this is going to happen, but it's all in Spidey's head. Are we both landing very clearly on that side of the fence?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, as soon as you have an element like a mist that exposes your fears or might show the future, you can't take... I mean, I just hate prophecy stories, you know? And I'm always willing to... sometimes stubbornly so, to read the twists and turns of this kind of thing wrong if they don't play out to my satisfaction.
I was waiting for him to pull back the curtain and say that they got the myths by like milking Madam Web or something.
Exactly. And I love that we've not had any Madam Web stuff in here. You know, you mentioned the totemic stuff, you know, from the JMS run that has, you know, ever since JMS's run, kind of occasionally resurfaced, but then it always gets popped back down like a whack-a-mole. And I feel like Spencer's approach to it here is about as deep as I enjoy it going, which is, yeah, it's kind of weird. There's all these, you know, animal-specific villains going around, but do they tap into some primal essence that can be feasted upon by space vampires? We don't need to get into that.
I agree with that because for me, JMS's run, it always, you know, it was about like science versus mythology. And in the end, it's never said whether the totems are real or not. I mean, there's some evidence, but the final scene addressing it is like, well, you can choose what to believe. And then it seems over the years, it's like, no, this is a real thing. And then now Spencer's kind of back here like, it's a real thing for those who believe in it, like the Cravens. You know,
Exactly.
And that's how I like it to be.
No, as a motivating factor for characters crazy enough to buy it, I love it. As something I'm supposed to ponder and truly take seriously. I mean, I remember reading those original JMS issues, and they teased beforehand. Those are what brought me back to Spider-Man, by the way, after my years off. And they teased beforehand this issue is going to make you ask a question nobody's ever asked before. And it turned out that question was, did the spider mean to bite Peter Parker? Ooh, that's not a question worth asking.
Well, now we got to ask the question, did the spider mean to bite Silk?
I am curious about the fact that, according to the splash page at the back of this issue, the Cravens have failed to dispatch Taskmaster and the Black Ants to haul in all of the other spider-themed heroes except the heroes. They brought in Tarantula, but they've not brought in Silk or those heroes.
Yeah, right. Although I do think we're going to get an eventual heel turn where Taskmaster is tasked to capture the Black Ant because somehow he's managed to avoid his animalistic outfit. I don't. It seems like a strange pairing, but let's talk about Humberto Ramos. I think before we get to what is, I think, the grandest of splash pages in this issue, the reveal of all the villains. So, how do you feel about Humberto Ramos for this story? I mean, he's got a bit of a lighter touch for a story that seems as dark as this one might be headed.
That's one of the things that I'm really responding to here. Spencer and Ramos both have a lighter touch than all previous Craven Hunt homages, and I like that. It does not feel like, a lot of those stories have tended toward a tendency that I call grim dumb. Some people call it grim dark. I call it grim dumb.
I prefer yours.
Always dumb. And, this story, there was you singled out that line earlier about Kraju enjoying those mists and he lives in that darkness. And, that's the only line here other than in the first 2 pages that actually sounds like it could come from your usual Craven's Last Hunt retread. And Spencer's not giving us that. He's giving us a tense adventure that has at its core the goofy concept of, the old short story, The Most Dangerous Game, and hunting for sport with a bunch of rich jerks who are it's craziness. It can't be that kind of story, but I'm impressed at the range of Ramos and Spencer in that in the moments that are touched with terror, or touched with Craven's obsessiveness, it does rise to the level almost of that story.
I totally agree. I think this is Humberto Ramos at his most adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's shown how much he's grown, over the years, going back to all the way back to Death in the Family in the Paul Jenkins run, which is nearly impossible to ferret out what's happening in the action scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very similar. It's a rainy day and obscured in darkness, and here everything is crystal clear. I'm never questioning the storytelling. I mean, even look back to a few years ago with Spider Island, where the fight scenes in that were madness, impossible to ferret out who the subject of any frame is. Even though I like that story, but here he has really learned about pacing and layouts, and everything is clear. His characters are beautifully emotive, just like the best of his work, which I would formerly have put on something like Amazing Spider-Man 700 and the flashback scenes with Peter where he's in that kind of heaven. I think that was his most kind of sincere and earnest. And here everything is we don't see Peter's face very much, but all the characters are beautifully emotional, and I buy all of their, even Felicia's retorts and Fury, all that stuff is great. And I think, he's added so many effects from the gas to the rains.
Mm-hmm.
They're all so beautifully
and there's
done.
Several, especially early on, there's one of Felicia, these kind of cross-hatched portraits, of characters when they're first mentioned. The first time we see Black Cat in this issue, is this beautiful portrait that takes up about a quarter of a page that is just iconic. It's so, so good.
She suddenly has freckles, but I'll buy it.
That's fine. That's fine. She seems more like he draws her more as a real person, even though his style is more avowedly cartoonish than who drew the last issue? Coelho. And I'd really like to single out the page after Peter has been beaten. We get the black page of nothing, and then we get the very rainy page of taxis outside the Plaza Hotel, Spider-Man being lugged by Craven Jr., I'm sorry, Black Ant and Taskmaster watching this from a tree. Just like 4 panels stripped across the page, silent, deeply emotive, deeply upsetting.
Even the silent sequence of Arcade flipping on the shield and all the people running from the glowing pink, it's got a haunting nature to it, something that's so silly.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think I love Otley on this book, but I also think Spencer and Ramos are a perfect pairing. And I think it's surprising because you'd think after all these years, and Ramos has been on this book for over a decade now, that we would kind of feel like his stuff is rote or tired and that the book should move on to someone new. But I think Ramos is very clearly etched out a space for himself in all-time Spider-Man artists, and this book is already off to a great start for him.
Mm-hmm. And this book is like just exhibit 1 in that, and then of course 700. And I also want to single out the wonderful panel design of I believe one of the last pages just before the big splash, where after Peter is coming to in a black costume in the park, he sees Tarantula, and then we get all these small detail panels of what is the bunny woman's name? I always forget.
White Rabbit and her furry boots.
Her furry boots, her little furry ears. So good.
Yeah.
Just so good. Those suggestive little panels.
It reminds me of John Romita Jr.'s reveal of the Hobgoblin. Like, you're seeing elements of his costume slowly building it up. And ultimately that reveal of all the villains is an all-time awesome. Like, I think about that one compared to the reveal of the villains in the Clone Conspiracy, where they looked like they were all part of like some weird like collecting card game where they're all just standing there. Like, here everybody's got so much character in how they're posed, the threat of the Scorpion. This was a really cool page, I felt like, and boy am I glad to see the classic costumes on everybody returning.
And so those pages are so powerful that for me, it was almost a disappointment when we then get, the randos with guns bursting into the scene. I would be totally fine if we just had Spider-Man and all these animal villains, going Hunger Games against each other in Central Park while Craven and his clone son hunt them. And then we get all these... I just have no respect for mooks in the Marvel universe who wear masks, have no powers, and are like mercenaries, who work for whatever villain they work for, have gone to the Taskmaster school. These are the guys that you always have like a couple Avengers with not a whole lot of powers. You have to throw these guys into the story so they can beat them up, while the big name Avengers actually deal with the problem. These are the guys that the Fantastic Four brings Wyatt Wingfoot around with them sometimes just so he can fight.
I am interested in exploring what seems to be this idea that like the villains that Spider-Man goes up against are like deeply damaged people who have resorted to crime because of their inherent character flaws, whereas these hunters are people that have everything that's going for them and yet still elect to be violent, joyfully violent, evil people. And I wonder if this story is going to be Spencer kind of drawing the line between like, yeah, there are villains that Spider-Man fates, but the worst people are the people that just opt their way into power with no responsibility versus the mooks who kind of fall backwards to their own detriment into power. And that's interesting to me.
Oh, you just know that, these billionaires are going to use this to get their kids into elite colleges.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know how to thread that needle that you set me up for, but
those, I mean, I got to say, before we got to the actual, page where we see, this kind of commando squad of rich hunters bursting into Central Park, the weird fact that this is the Plaza Hotel and there's this ball going on and there's all this money invested in this. This is like Craven Madoff stuff. And I am eager to see where this thread goes. I also don't know why Craven needs money, but it feels very timely. Just this week, the Washington Post ran a story that was pretty much, here's why we hate billionaires now. It's something that has shifted in my life to where now suddenly the thought of wealth in America no longer is like necessarily suggests decency and hard work. So I'm kind of eager to see where that goes. I just want to sound one more note of possible caution, which is I really liked a lot of what you said earlier about the clarity of Ramos's action scenes in this issue. Granted, his big brawl was, mano a mano. When I saw that splash page, my excitement, of course, peaked because it's such a great splash page, but also I'm suddenly also kind of back to, oh no, are we going to get a too many characters events like we've had so many times before, where each character gets maybe one good moment to shine, and we have a lot of cluttered, confusing splashes where you can't really follow beat-to-beat action?
I agree with that. That is a real fear of mine. What I'm hopeful is that Central Park is enough for everyone to go their own way and that we stick with Peter through this. And if I have one complaint about Spencer's stuff, other than the first issue, it's that it seems not very Peter-centric. He's very interested in the supporting cast, I think almost over Peter. And I'm hopeful, and I think this issue got us into Peter's headspace with the Mary Jane stuff and the web swinning and monologuing, that this is the first real delve into who Peter is. And we're going to ignore all that other stuff, but I agree with you. I don't want to see another, here's Team Z, and they're doing this task, and here's Team F, and they're doing this task, and they're in outer space for some reason. I worry about that as well.
I'm heartened to see there's not enough issues, really, for this story to look like it's going to be padded.
I agree, but then we could also get the Dan Slott thing where it's like we go nowhere for 4 issues, and then the 5th issue needs to wrap up everything, and it's handled inelegantly.
Can I ask you now, after having read all 3 of these Hunted issues so far, the Black Cat issue, the HU issue that we talked about last time, is that something you absolutely should read to really follow this story?
I think so. I think Black Cat seems to be a major player in this, and I think understanding her headspace is important. We get a bit of a recap here, it's the spider tracer that Peter gave her. And I don't know that you need to know that he gave it to her while mock proposing. This is a character that was radically changed just a few issues ago back to who she used to be. I think it helps people to understand that context. I don't know. Is it essential? I can't say, but for me, I think you'd be missing a lot if you didn't pick up the HU issue.
And it feels essential to me, maybe not necessarily for this story, but for where Spencer is taking this character who it seems he's taking great pains to try to work back into the main cast as a serious supporting character.
Yeah, and I think Spencer's interest in character over everything else makes that issue important because it is so heavy on character. And it's like you're missing a main thrust of what he's interested in.
And it's also just a bang-up issue.
Yeah, well, that too. So let's talk about grades on this issue. Alan, where does this one sit for you?
I'm going to be just very slightly cautious. I might regret this later for not being a little more gung-ho, but this is an A-.
And I'm right there with you, A-. This is a really...
God, I don't know. Maybe an A. Just those pencils, man. Those pencils.
Yeah, look, yeah, we could easily go A, but I've been burned before, and I've been burned and mackied before, I guess. But here we go.
Hey, I'm glad you mentioned them because I thought of them while reading this, and I thought of them a lot during the slot run. The slot run had its peaks and valleys, but even at its least inspired, maybe during some of the Parker Industries stuff, It's just, I always had the sense while reading the slot run that this creator cares deeply about these characters and cares deeply about all the previous stories about these characters and is just trying to make something great. And I feel that during the Spencer run too. And that is not something that I can say I always felt during all the runs of Spider-Man history.
No, and it is a good buoy, like for all of the things that you might say about whether you enjoy Dan Slott's stuff, there is a respect for these characters that comes through, and you can't be too upset about what they do to them because, you can tell they deeply love them. Like, do I think Slott's Peter Parker truly understood the character? No, but I know that he loves whatever version he thinks Peter Parker is.
Exactly.
So, A- is from both of us. Thanks to everybody at home for tuning in. And Alan, thank you for filling in here on this episode. Or should I keep referring to you as Mark?
I wish I could be Mark.
Well, I love having you on the show, Alan. And, if Mark's gone, at least it gives me an excuse to talk to you.
Well, always a pleasure, man. Keep your feet on the wall and keep thwipping for the stars.
You nailed it. So it was great fun to have Alan join me for those 2 episodes, and we hope you guys had fun as well. So thanks again to Alan, but enough with the thanks. Let's invite Mark back on the show for our review of Amazing Spider-Man number 18.
Yeah, Dan, all I got to say to you for that is this. Bravo.
Mark, I hope you're not bitter about me replacing you for 2 episodes.
Yeah, just 2. Felt like less when I was gone, but okay.
All right, well, you know what? Let's go to the next review, and Mark and I will deal with this while you guys listen to that.
What's new? Is Spider-Man still wearing red? Is it blue? Maybe he took a week off 'cause he had the flu. But probably not 'cause his methods seem tried and true. Let's find out in the Spider-Man review.
Well, welcome back, Patreon subscribers. It's I, Dapper Dan, and I am joined by my co-host, my banter buddy, back from his break. Introduce yourself, banter buddy.
Yeah, hi, it is I, the mischievous one, Mark Ginocchio, coming live from the basement in my new house. Dan, how are you?
Very exciting. You have a bar down there, so I guess you're going to be able to invite all these villains over for a drink.
Yeah, I mean, this could become the new supervillain bar that burned down, right? Many moons ago.
You have to put over the bar down there that it's the bar with no name.
The bar with no name, exactly. I mean, yes.
So, Mark, you were gone, and while you were gone, I invited our friend Alan Scherstl to guest host the show with me, which felt very weird. Like the first one in, I'd say, 200 issues of Spider-Man comics that you haven't reviewed it with me?
Right. Don't quit your day job, Alan. I mean,
I think that might be actually pertinent for Alan because the closing of the Village Voice. But
well, true. Sorry.
Our hearts go out to you, Alan. Mark, I did want to ask you though about your thoughts about issue 17 and that 16.hu that we didn't talk about. Tell me what did you think about these issues?
Well, let me first start by saying, and I'm not trying to do a cop out here, but it feels like those issues came out like 200 years ago for me right now. So,
yeah.
In talking about it, certainly I felt like 17 left more of a impression on me, to be honest with you, at least, in retrospect to what I can talk about at the present moment. But I felt that the stakes were certainly raised. I mean, we had some concerns going back to issue 16 about what exactly is the drama here? I mean, we kind of had that weird, very, exposition heavy issue that was mining what seemed like a flashback of something that never actually happened. So I was very relieved where 17 it actually seemed to kind of ratchet up the suspense and the drama in terms of what was going on. It still left me with questions about what exactly is Craven's play here, and have those questions even more so once we start talking about issue 18 here. But like we're dealing with MJ in danger, and there's certainly some stakes to that, and it's I don't know. I do like the settings. The story is actually reminding me a lot of Spider Island so far through these issues, in terms of kind of the idea that this feels like a big event, but it's a big Spider-Man event, in that it feels very insular to the world of Spider-Man, if that makes sense.
I totally agree with that. I feel like this feels like Spider Island, almost like to the issue.
Yeah.
Because, I'll get it out of the way and say, like, I didn't think that this issue was particularly strong. I don't think it's a bad issue, but following up the last issue, which I thought was probably the best issue of the Spencer run since the first issue, this was a little bit of a letdown for me. And I think it gets back to what you were saying, which is I don't really know what Craven's play is. And I felt like the last issue did a good job of kind of like, nudging our way closer to figuring that out, and gave a little bit of stakes for Spider-Man. And I thought this issue would continue to expand on that. But I actually thought it was like kind of a diversion when I felt like we should be really stepping on the gas. Like a lot of this issue was dealing with like things that I don't even think are necessarily involved with this story, like the Shush stuff.
Right.
Like as excited as I am to see that character step up into the spotlight, like, so to speak, I was like, what is he doing in my Craven story? And we'll get to that a little bit more. I like this issue overall. I just was like, I still want to know what Spider-Man's like. What are the stakes for him in this beyond life and death? What is the moral arc that we're going to start kind of heading down here? Where is this story going? And we still have 4 issues left and some HU issues, but I thought that this issue would be more of a gasser than like a kind of a pause for other things. What do you think about this issue?
About this issue, I mean, just to give one more comment on the last issue that kind of dovetails with this one, Dan. I guess I would say that things were elevated to me because, like, certainly the threat and the level of threat we know are very high. It's just kind of why of the threat is still unknown, and that carries over into this issue. So I feel that's what still needs to be resolved to really put this story into a higher gear, but certainly the establishment of the threat itself of Craven and Central Park and this kind of isolated bubble of like chaos and whatnot. It's that I like that as a concept. I think that's pretty cool, and like there's definitely this element of oh man, how is Spider-Man going to get out of this? Which is what keeps you reading for me. So that's cool. So now transitioning strictly into this issue, I mean, this definitely felt, it's kind of that trademark middling transitionary issue of a Spider-Man arc. You know what I mean? Like, although I think I might have a slightly more favorable view of it than you did, just because like, even though it kind of felt a little middling and didn't really advance much in terms of, again, the why of things going on, it felt very active and moving and intense. I liked the intensity of this comic a lot. Like, it got, okay, we only lost the iguana so far.
There's a few others who I couldn't identify.
Right.
Like animal characters that I'm like, I don't know that I know who that person is.
Yeah, but I mean, is Stegron gone? I mean, are we to let to believe that Stegron bit the dust in this issue?
I think they would be more explicit with it if he died.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Iguana is not a huge character, and neither is Stegron, but he's still a little bit of a step above Iguana, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not just because, he's appeared on our show a bunch of times.
He is a friend of the show,
He's a friend of the pod. But, like, especially when that thing happened, when the scene happened with Iguana, like, it definitely kind of, like, raised the stakes of, oh, man, like, they're killing people here, and like you don't know who might go next. So like the intensity of it kind of worked for me, and I think that's part of what like maybe bumps this up a notch for me, just in terms of like my enjoyment of it as a story. But like kind of looking at it more artistically and creatively, in terms of its execution, did it do everything it needed to do? No, it didn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about the first kind of like that iguana moment, which is kind of a big moment. I mean, we get this big splash of all the characters running from the Craven robots, which I thought were people in suits, but I was wrong. They are like VR robots, controlled remotely.
Yeah, that's a bit of a letdown for me because that was to me again. It was like, why are we recruiting all of these hunters? Now, granted, is it that Craven was truly recruiting them or just dominating them? I don't know. But what was the point of bringing in all these hunters and game hunters if they were just going to operate VR machines?
I mean, I still think there's like a card to be played here. Like, it's my sense that they spent all this time establishing the VR visors and stuff because they're not going to be benevolent. Like, they're going to use these to do something with these people. There's some other, thing to turn. Like something is going to happen.
Oh, yeah. These people are totally going to get screwed by Craven and Arcade here. There's no question. Yeah.
Absolutely. Whether that's they use their credit cards to bankrupt them or something like that. There's something to do there. I didn't love the way that these characters were written. I'm going to be honest. I thought that some of the dialogue was really corny and probably intentionally corny, but having them say I'm so hot for you right now, or taking out your anger on someone for not dating them in high school. I get it. It's kind of toxic masculinity stuff and hip modern language from aloof people, but it kind of like made them into cartoons instead of actual threats,
right,
to me. And like I should feel like these robot guys are really threatening, because they are the main threat of this issue. And coupled with Humberto Ramos's artwork, which I felt went like a tad more cartoony in this issue than the last one. Like this feels like a totally different tone than the last issue where we got that like beautiful silent sequence while they were turning on the shield. Like this is just like jokes and words and big splashy panels. I guess I didn't buy into the threat quite as much as I did in the last issue with these robot characters.
Yeah, I can see where you're going with that. I mean, it's just it's definitely a letdown, and also like I'm also kind of a little confused by the whole like, oh, they're faster and stronger Cravens. I mean, like Craven's supposed to be the best, right? So why are we having something that's faster and stronger? Like I mean, and
I always am bothered by that in narratives when they feel like the need to like knock out the legs from underneath their main villain just to like up a threat, because it doesn't mean anything to me. You know what I mean? Like they're faster and stronger than Craven. Okay, fine, but like they were already scary as they were. You didn't need to like make them that powerful.
Right. Yeah. So I'm with you on that. I mean, again, it's just if I may kind of just say this point outright, I still don't understand what the motivation is here of Craven. Like it's we had this big introduction to this whole situation where this is kind of like I mean, my understanding is he wants Spider-Man to kill him, right? Like that
seems to be my understanding. Yes,
that's what he wants. So if that is the goal, why is he putting him in a situation where he can where he can be killed by somebody else? It still doesn't make sense to me. Like I don't get how A leads to B here, and
especially if those robots are more powerful than Craven,
right?
Who previously defeated Spider-Man,
right? And it's not like it doesn't seem to be the case of it's not like the Gauntlet where it's like we got to weaken him to get something out of him, because that's not. Is it like the only thing that I keep coming back to is like, is this going to test Spider-Man's morality to a point? Because, Spider-Man is never going to willingly kill Craven, right? Like that's from our understanding, right?
No. And the closest he got was like Grim Hunt. And then, we got that kind of like flash forward responsibility moment where he like backs down from it. Although he does give his wife the mark of Cain, which was interesting.
Yeah. But I was going to say, like, I guess the only possibility is with this whole setup, the goal is to just completely test Spider-Man's morality to a point where by not killing Kraven, something so catastrophic happens that will just scar him for the rest of his life. You know what I mean? Like the deaths of hundreds of others or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just that blood will be on his hands. I guess to me that's the only possible route in terms of what the play is. But like again, we're still not like we're now 3 issues in, and I want to start hearing what the plan is. You know?
Yeah, we're starting to get some morality stuff. Like, I thought that the Vulture Gibbon stuff was interesting. You know, it's like really a basic, simple morality thing, you know. But, like, we're already starting to play with themes and ideas about, like, how much do these villains actually trust Spider-Man? And I think if it comes down to one thing, it will be Spider-Man has to choose, like, the death of Kraven versus, like, the death of all these villains by someone else's hands. You know what I mean? To me, that would be kind of interesting. It's like, if he doesn't actually do the killing, does he still feel responsible for it or something like that? Right. Like, maybe that's where we're going. I like that stuff with the Gibbon. I like that he acknowledged that the Gibbon only tried to really kill him once. Right. Like, and we've never seen the character again. So I thought that was funny. What do you think about all the MJ stuff? I mean, we spent a significant portion of this book with MJ in the apartment, kind of figuring out how she's dealing with this. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel again it was some important character work in terms of trying to make her less of a, like, you know, same old MJ damsel. Not. Let me rephrase that. I feel like they're doing a good job here of trying to get away from kind of like that initial Peter MJ coupling like that we saw like in the late 80s and early 90s where, you know, like, oh, we don't want to marry them off because then she'll just be a damsel in distress, and then they just made her a damsel in distress anyway. You know, like I like that they're working to try and create some independence and show some growth in her character. But I mean, not to jump ahead to the bigger reveal in this comic, but like the incorporation of Shush here really threw me because I was not ready for it, and I'm not sure I need Shush in this story too.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I want to talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the first MJ scene where she's kind of dancing in the apartment, listening to music, and like kind of being a bit carefree while Peter is out kind of risking his life. Right. I thought it was a really interesting evolution for the character, especially if you compare it to Kraven's Last Hunt, where that book used MJ to just sit in her apartment and worry about Peter.
Yeah.
So like, and they call out the character growth here. Allow me to bring in something that's not comics related into this. Do you know about this movie Free Solo?
I don't, but I'm sure you're going to tell me.
It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary this year. It's about a guy who climbs El Capitan in Yosemite. It's like that 90-meter vertical rock face. It's just straight up and down. And to free solo something means to do it without any ropes or harnesses. He's just going to like climb the sheer face of this rock. And it's, I think, having watched this movie, it's one of the greatest like athletic feats of mankind. It's incredible. But like at any minute he could die and just fall to his death, and there's nothing to save him. And many people have died. And he's the first person to do this. But what's interesting about the movie is that it explores his relationship with his new girlfriend through this, who basically has to like accept that while he's doing this, he might just fall to his death and they'll never say anything to each other ever again. And so like reading this issue after having watched that movie really made me like, they couldn't be more similar, right? Like MJ has to kind of just like know that like every time he goes out, he might not come back again. And in Free Solo, it's interesting because he basically tells her like, my like passion for climbing rocks supersedes our relationship. Like I may love you, but my life is like about climbing this rock, or about climbing these mountains. And I think you could watch the movie and find this guy to be like really, like obnoxious or negative, or you'd be like, why don't they split up? But what I found so moving about it is that this woman who is still with him, because they appeared together at the Academy Awards, basically she's like doesn't like that he does this, but she understands that by telling him to stop, she would be like damaging his life in a way that is almost worse than death. He would be not able to follow his passions. And it's like a perfect one-to-one comparison for this relationship. And so I don't know. I wanted to get that out because I found it beautiful that this issue actually kind of explored that she, like, while she still can look out the window and worry about Peter, she kind of has resigned herself to going on with her life because she knows she's not going to be able to stop him. And I like that a lot. And so I had talked last episode about, Alan and I had talked that, like, perhaps no trouble was going to befall MJ and she would just be fine and, find a way to move on past Peter being Spider-Man and a way to live with it. And it would be about exploring, can Peter move past, him being Spider-Man and being in a relationship? But, this is a segue to talking about Shush. Like, I was a bit let down. Like, as much as I wanted to see Shush coming back into the narrative in a meaningful way, I was a bit let down that we're not going that route, which is not a knock against this comic because it shouldn't be living up to what I put onto it. But I also felt like, what is Shush doing in this story? So I want to hear, what did you think about Shush? You said you were thrown by it?
Yeah, because like you said, we've been... Since the Spencer run began, we've been dealing with these kind of different threads and not to kind of riff off what you just said. I guess my own expectations, I shouldn't necessarily judge a comic harshly for not fulfilling what my own expectations of what it should be. But like, to me, like I thought that the Shush story and Kraven's stories were two separate things, like that I wouldn't have been shocked if one kind of fed into the other one way or another, but I didn't think that they would be so critically intertwined, which is what this seems to set up now. And
even from the opening page where we get the centipede and the spider in an ode to Kraven's Last Hunt with the spider and the rat imagery, it's as soon as I saw the centipede there, I knew it was Shush's dialogue. And I was like, oh, this centipede and Shush are going to be a part of this?
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you off.
No. But that's exactly it. We got this from the beginning, and yeah, I thought the same thing in the beginning. I'm like, wait, why are we going right to Shush? Like, what does Shush have to do with this Kraven story? And again, especially since there are still so many unresolved questions on my end, at least, in terms of what this Kraven story, where this Kraven story is going, and what Kraven's long-term plan is, and how he plans to get to that end. So to then bring in this other like major dangling thread that we've had for the last 18 issues into this whole thing, I guess I understand why Spencer would be going in this direction. It kind of like, this is his story. It's very clear now. This is his big story. This is where he's gonna bring in all the big things, and then once it's all said and done, I'm sure we're gonna reset in some way, and we're gonna have another big story. But like, to me, like I almost feel like you're almost kind of diminishing your own potential returns here in bringing in too much. It's almost like overkill. It's like let's have a really good Kraven story because it's been a while, and then once that's done, we can have a Shush story. But like, I don't understand why they need to be the same story.
I also feel like there's so much that's up in the air about this, story where we don't know motivations yet, and there's all these moving pieces. To add another big question mark and another big moving piece, it's like, I don't know how these are going to dovetail or if they ever will. And to have Spider-Man's sole motivations in this story be to like basically get out of this, protect people so he can go and save Mary Jane as the mists made him see, but have that not be related to Kraven feels like it's opening itself up to not be like an open and shut book. Like it's like, oh, but I don't know how that will ever dovetail back into this because it seems like a whole other thing. So suddenly the main character of our book's motivations are not related to the main adversary that he, seems to be facing. It's like, it's just getting its wires crossed.
Right. And frankly, if we find out that Kraven and the Shush character were working together, like, then which I don't know is necessarily the case, but if they turns out that they are, like there's been no work done to establish that that was a possibility. To me, that seems like an unfair twist. You know what I mean? Like, you have to at least lay some groundwork that that's a possible, resolution to this. It just seems like, you know, we're trying to like tie everything together that's been floated out there for the last 18 issues without necessarily thinking if it goes together. Like, you know, chocolate and peanut butter sure tastes great, but, you know, throwing pickles into the mix may not be the best thing.
Yeah, no, I was trying to make a chocolate peanut butter nod myself, but you threaded that needle.
Oh, okay. I guess so.
What do you think about the way that Shush is kind of characterized here? I mean, I thought it was odd that his monologue didn't maintain his typical kind of like demon-like lettering. But like, what's interesting with the character, he's got a weird sense of humor, like bringing up Hobbs the tiger.
Right.
I thought was kind of a strange thing for like a dastardly evil villain to bring up. But interesting. I love Calvin Hobbs. But even in the end, his kind of big smile grin, it's very Joker-esque.
Yeah, I mean, now I feel like we're back to I was going to say the Jackal, since he's basically Spider-Man's Joker, you know, like, but yeah, it totally, like, this is a lot going on, a lot to unpack in this issue, and yet so little truly happens in terms of plot advancement, so it's kind of weird.
Yeah. I'm going to need the next one to kind of like pick up the slack a little bit. Like, I hope the next one is not another issue like this. Like, I can do this once or twice, but I felt like a lot of like Dan Slott events, which we've done a number of them now together, Mark. Like, it'll be like 4 issues like this, where it's like a lot of water, you know, boiling, right? And then like the final issue is meant to wrap everything up. And like, I don't know that I can wait like 4 or however many more issues to find out the motivations of these characters and really get this like plot pieces moving together a little bit. But some things are already being executed on, like the Black Ant and Taskmaster stuff.
We knew that was coming.
Yeah, I mean, I thought perhaps Taskmaster might like choose not to ultimately turn on his friend, but I guess I kind of overestimated how close of friends they were.
Yeah. But we definitely I'm pretty sure 2 issues ago we were saying, oh, what's with Black Ant? Why is he in the pile?
And I think there's probably more ultimately to come from that. Who knows? Maybe Black Ant will go inside of Kraven and explode him from the inside out. Try surviving that, Kraven.
There you go.
Yeah. What do you think about Humberto Ramos's work in this, especially compared to the last issue?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't think he got as much to play with here. I mean, like some of the action was nicely rendered, and I think like his kind of kinetic style certainly lent to the danger element and that feeling of kind of being off center and a little unnerved by the action in this comic. But also at the same time, I mean, you know, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, I said to you, like, oh, didn't so-and-so bite the dust too? Like, and I don't know, like, I feel like I should not be asking that question to you on the podcast. Like, you know, like that needs to be rendered more clearly. Like, you know, like, okay, the iguana one's pretty clear, but like there were others where it was kind of murky, and it was like, so wait, what is the fate that befell these characters? I mean, like, I think that needs to be a little more clear one way or another. And that kind of missed the mark, in my opinion.
Well, that gets back to some of the kind of essential questions I have about like this issue's story, which is like you have like Iguana getting killed and some of these other characters getting killed, but then the Gibbon just gets like netted up, you know, and you're like, why are these hunters holding back? You know, like just kind of, aren't they here to kill? Like that's their goal.
Right.
It seems convenient like that some of them are being just maimed, whereas others are being murdered. But I'm sure that will work itself out.
Well, how else are we going to get that point HU issue of the Gibbon, Dan?
You know, you're right. I'll forgive it. I just want that Gibbon issue. That's all I want in the world.
I have one request.
I want to hear the name Martin Blank issued in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man again.
There you go.
I still think, like, yeah, I think a lot of his chaos stuff is a little hard to ferret out. Like there was one panel where the owl was talking, but he was like shoved into deep background.
Yeah, I did not see the owl because I was like, oh, Owlsley. Oh, wait, I can't see him in this.
Yeah, but I do think like all that is made up for like the MJ stuff is really beautiful. I love Humberto Ramos's version of MJ. I think she's one of the iconic versions of the character.
Yeah, and I like his Shush stuff too, for the record. I do like how he's rendered Shush so far. I mean, I know Otley kind of created the character, but I think there's something, in terms of like the long slithering centipedes and stuff like that also works very well with Ramos' style.
Actually, I think technically Ramos is the creator of the character because he did the backup in issue 1.
Oh, there you go.
Where they introduced the character. So I don't know. But and it could be someone else entirely that designed the character, and then they went off that design, like when they bring in outside people to kind of mess with stuff. Well, that's a good question to ask Nick Spencer if we ever have him back on the show. One last little beat I wanted to ask you about. Maybe you had some feelings. Like MJ finds the centipede in her hair, but then ultimately kind of lets the centipede go. She's letting them go into a rainstorm, which maybe not the healthiest thing for a bug in New York, but what do you think about that? Because there seems to be a sort of like tenderness from MJ that Shush is responding to, saying like, like when all the world's order is kind of upended, it's the people that are the most kind-hearted that are often like the most kind of easily dispatched. They're kind of let go. Do you see some kind of tenderness from Shush to her, or is it kind of like a bitter tenderness that he's like, the weak people of the earth need to be culled kind of thing?
No, I think it's more the former than the latter. I mean, we've speculated about this, Dan, about, who Shush is or what the potential is. And I still, more or less agree with you, or at least agree with one version of you. I don't know if your opinion has changed. I mean, I did miss that one episode. So, but that the character is, I feel like it's some kind of manifestation of Peter, whether it's an alternative version or kind of like, I think you've kind of talked about that it's like almost like the embodiment of the marriage, right? Is that still kind of where you stand on it?
That's still my top theory. There's something about like the centipede stuff, but I could see Nick Spencer writing that off any which way. This to me continued like there's an obsession with MJ, and he continues to use the word Pete when referring to Peter, which is a sort of familiarity. And I just think it's in somehow tied into the Mephisto deal in some way. And it was yet to play out. We just got the solicit for Amazing Spider-Man issue 24, which will be about like the 1 year mark for Nick Spencer on the book. So, like, that's the issue, apparently, where we're going to learn who and what Shush is.
Right.
So, shortly thereafter, this story, which I think runs to issue 22.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're on a collision course here with whatever Shush is. And I don't know. I think the initial theory that I had is still holding up pretty strong.
Yeah. So, the point being that if what you are suggesting is true, like, yeah, I would think that even if there is kind of a coldness and a almost a violence to the idea of the marriage coming from this character, there will also be a tenderness to it, it's kind of like, it's cruel because it's hurt, not because it's innately evil, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, what's your grade on this one?
I'm gonna. It's funny. Like I think I felt more highly about it until I started like actually talking it out. But like I'm gonna still stick with a solid B on this. Like I said, there were parts of it that really kind of kept me into it and kept me going. But kind of like what you said back to a few minutes ago. Like one of these issues for this story is more than enough for me. Like if this becomes a trend, my opinion of this storyline is going to drop fast.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I'm going to give it a B. That was what I was going to say before we had a conversation, and I'm sticking with it.
I probably would have done B+ until we started talking. So,
Oh, look at me, negative Nelly.
well,
or whatever.
no, it wasn't negative. It was just kind of like having the forum to discuss these ideas the way we do. Dan, we're very fortunate that we do this. It kind of moved my needle a little bit, as it should. That's what conversation and dialogue should be, right? We're not here to just stand firm in our opinions.
Well, you and I have a fundamental disagreement about conversation. No, I'm just kidding.
So that's what we're going to disagree about. Well, look who came crawling back for that one, Dan. So many of these .hu issues have been truly excellent, but none have been as unforgettable as Amazing Spider-Man number 18.hu. It's unforgettable because I'm back to talk about it.
Of course, Mark, of course.
All of our patrons and Patreon already know what Dan and I thought of this issue, but it's high time you guys all tuned in as well. So let's get right into our review. Yo, what up? It's your boy Ginocchio. All right. So here we are. We're talking about, what is it, Amazing Spider-Man number 18.hu.
Yeah, this is the first .hu that you and I have talked about. I guess there's only one more to go.
That's right.
I think we both liked the last one a fair bit.
So by us doing these episodes, Dan, are we indicating that in terms of our collections that these count as part of the run?
Well, I mean to ask you about that. I mean, I think they do. I think that they're pretty essential to the story that's being told here.
They're essential to the story that's being told, but I mean, what if it was like a crossover with Spectacular Spider-Man or something? I mean, does that count? I don't know. I'm just saying.
I mean, I would say, like, if for our runs, if you're missing issues of Kraven's Last Hunt,
right,
you're kind of missing something essential to your collection.
You're missing it to your collection, but do you still own all of Amazing Spider-Man if you don't have the Web of Spider-Man of Kraven's Last Hunt?
Well, look, you made me get Ends of the Earth one shot. Like, this is far more essential than that.
Okay, gotcha. Well, whatever. The thing is, Dan, you have it, I have it, I have all the annuals, you have all the annuals, you have Ends of the Earth. Let's just move on.
Does that mean that you don't have the Ends of the Earth?
I do have Ends of the Earth.
All right. I wanted to clear that up.
Okay,
because
okay.
we're not moving past this
Right.
Quite yet. So, I don't know. Let's talk about these Hunted issues so far, because now we got 2 of them done. It seems like the pattern is pretty obvious, right? They're kind of like giving backstories, summaries to flesh out characters that are in, this book. We're getting one with the Lizard next, who looks to become a major character in this Hunted storyline.
Right.
And, it's kind of like, at least for this issue, I felt like it made the Gibbons backstory seem like one coherent thought, even though it likely wasn't.
Right.
And these books have been used to kind of like raise the stakes emotionally, I feel like, for the Hunted storyline. Like, I can't imagine not reading this and then reading issue 19. Like, it so enriches that issue.
It's referenced multiple times in 19 and both in a kind of, yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. You need to read these to kind of fully appreciate the story, although obviously you could still know what's going on to a very healthy degree without having read them. So that in that respect, it's kind of perfectly done. And, it is kind of interesting too, not to get too far ahead of ourselves here, like, a couple months ago when we first started talking about this storyline, we were like, oh, we're going to get these little standalones with the villains and the Gibbon gets one. What? Like, kind of making fun of it. And this probably ended up being one of the most devastating single issues of Spider-Man I've read in a long, long time, although I still have some issues with it in that regard. But so it's like what could have essentially have been a one-off joke. I feel that they took well advantage of making this, like you said, a moment with real emotional stakes and pathos to it, which is something to be admired to that degree.
I think the reason I was so excited about this book is related to something that you're saying, which is like I saw it coming down the pike and I thought, Nick Spencer, he's not just going to pull out the Gibbon and not do anything interesting with it, because why else use the Gibbon? You know, like, he's kind of been so forgotten over the years. Like, there had to be a reason that Spencer wanted to tell this story, and immediately my mind went to the kind of like war and of jokes and riddles from Tom King's Batman run, where they kind of like reintroduced the character of Kite Man and made him the central figure of that book and redeemed that silly character in a really touching and profound way. Have you read The War of Jokes and Riddles?
I have not, but that sounds very good.
Yeah, it is really good. It's truly excellent. Like, if you are like on and off Batman fan, just go pick up, like, I think it's like volume 4 of the new run. You don't need to read anything else. Just know that, like, the Riddler and the Joker are going to war with each other, but the whole thing is told through like a narrative structure following the observations of Kite Man and his backstory. And it turns this goofy joke of a character into this truly profound, deeply sad story. And I immediately thought that must be what he's doing. You know, I'm sure he's read that book. And I mean, I think anyone that's read that and has read this could see the very obvious parallels between these stories. You know, ultimately leading in, let's just say it, the Gibbon's death.
Yes.
In this issue.
We get some real quality character moments. Like, we get this whole subplot involving his relationship with Princess Python. Again, like another kind of one-off joke of a character, but by bringing these characters together in a very, I feel, sincere and serious way, you get some interesting plot twists that develop out of that. You know, so that is good. But this book is also quite brutal. You know, like, I mean, like, yes, he dies, but it's also how he dies.
Well, yeah, there's this one page, it's like a 9-panel sequence of him just getting beat to a pulp. Not to mention that he is riddled with bullets throughout the entire book. I mean, this is like almost like the passion of the Gibbon. You know what I mean? Like, it is I mean, I wouldn't compare the Gibbon to like Christ or something, but like, you know, he is a misunderstood figure in all ways, and all of his character flaws kind of come out here in a way that's really saddening. I mean, I like this story a lot for how it looks back on the character's history. I mean, in his first appearance, the whole idea was that like everyone mocked him, including Spider-Man, which kind of sent him into like a fury that like he would ultimately come to regret. But I think that, like, it kind of, this story did a good job recapturing that story and adding in this kind of bullying element that suggests, like, that Spider-Man was just kind of the latest bully in his life. And to me, it implied an interesting moral lesson about treating everyone with respect at all times, you know, because you never know the context with which people are entering into relationships or encounters with you, and that Spider-Man's brief moment of callousness feels like you can feel for the Gibbon in that moment, because like he's suffered a life of slings, and here's a guy that is just piling on, and I think it suggests that, you know, Stan did actually have like an interesting thing to say with the Gibbon, no matter how silly we kind of like regard those issues.
No, that's a good point, and you know, again, kind of more seriously than I ever thought I would have to be thinking about the Gibbon. But again, I feel like that speaks to the general point of this comic. But you know, as well done as this issue is, Dan, and you and I kind of talked a little bit about this offline when I first read this comic. You know, the art is, you know, Ken Lashley's art is really phenomenal here in terms of the darkness of it. You know, we get all this great backstory and context, but you know, like, there's this element to me that keeps going back to the fact is, I mean, did we bring the Gibbon back just to kill him? And if we did that, which seems to be the case, you know, with this larger story about, you know, with Hunted kind of being, we're still kind of in this no man's land in terms of what the actual plot of this storyline is, and we'll get to that in our next Patreon episode when we talk about 19. Like, I don't know, like I want to feel that like his death was for something, and I still don't have that sense, and now it's just making me more frustrated by the lack of direction in the larger storyline. And And I don't know if that is going to ultimately sour my opinion on this story when years go on. Because, even if we do get a good resolution, like in the moment, like I want to feel like, oh man, this character was so misunderstood and he died and it's sad, and I want to see Spider-Man avenge that and do better, but I still don't know what he's doing it for, and that's really frustrating and kind of hard for me to get my arms around as a reader, because like I just need more information about what this story is. We're not getting it, and it's really ticking me off.
It is like kind of a level of darkness that we don't see in books like this. Like, it truly is just a portrait of a casualty of war,
right?
In some way, like I don't think that Spider-Man will ever find out what happened in this story, and to me that makes it all the more tragic, especially the kind of Princess Python subplot that ultimately the Gibbon decided to side with the Vulture in issue 18 because he was trying to reconnect with this former like love of his, and that like Spider-Man's interpretation is probably that the Gibbon didn't trust him, whereas the reality of the situation is that he was looking for Princess Python somewhere in the the dome, and to me it suggests like a sort of humanity that like all of these characters have a story that's happening that we might not ever learn about. And so for me, like I feel that complaint, and I totally understand it. Like, you don't want someone to just write something just to hurt you.
Yeah.
But to me, it like raises the stakes considerably, because every person that dies in this story going forward, I'm going to imagine has humanity in them. You know what I mean? In the way that like I would have laughed off the Gibbon before, which is I guess fitting for the Gibbon,
right?
And his kind of crutch. But like this book to me, like there's the moment in 19, and I don't want to get too deep into it, where we see all of the bodies of various people that have been killed. And I'm thinking when I see that, like, it's so much richer to me. The stakes are so much higher because I know all these people are human beings in some way, and like, the Gibbon is especially painful because it's obvious why he chose the Gibbon for this story. He's a character that's always been looked like over.
Yeah.
Like, no one has paid him any attention or offered him any empathy. And so he's asking you, the reader, to give him empathy. And the only moment that he truly gets empathy from anyone in the books, other than Spider-Man in his dying moment, is like the people who kill him to put him out of his misery.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's I don't know. It is gruesome and perhaps a bit much, but for me the takeaway is like it elevates Hunted perhaps higher than it's due in the pages of the regular issues, because I don't know that the story really deserves this kind of like pain in the way that it's being written. So you might be right, Mark, ultimately. But like for what it is, I thought that this issue has enriched my experience more than I think almost any other issue in this book has.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I see what you're saying, and I guess I still will keep an open mind and reserve judgment until all the pieces are in pieces are in place. But yeah, it's just kind of hard for me to kind of break from this idea of, I mean, I know it's kind of a reflection on larger things going on, and Spencer has a knack for that, but like this idea of what exactly did he die for? You know what I mean? Like, we still don't know what Craven's plan is, like we're now more than halfway through this storyline, and again, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but we'll talk about it in our next episode. Like, I feel like the characters are even now kind of almost joking, like, what's the plan, man? You know what I mean? It's like, I feel like Scott Evil with, are you just going to shoot the guy or what? Like what are you doing? So with all this still up in the air, I mean, even if Spider-Man never knows what happens here, and he probably won't, and that's fine. I don't think that's what my issue is, but it's like, but me as the reader, I want to know what, like, if we're going to be put through all this, the last bit of context I need to know is why. What is putting us as a reader through all this, putting Spider-Man through what he's being put through. Why is this happening? What is the payoff? You know, like why am I investing my time in this and my emotions in this and feeling manipulated by it? And I'm not saying that necessarily as a bad thing, but like, you know, I'm allowing myself to kind of succumb to the story and to submit to it. But why? And we still haven't gotten it. We haven't gotten it through this many issues. We're not going to get it in the next issue when we talk about that. I'm kind of losing patience, and it's affecting how I view everything going forward until we finally get the why.
I think you're right. I mean, ultimately, cheap manipulation is the worst. You know, feeling like you've had your heartstrings pulled for no reason it's painful because you can see the artificiality of it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a big boy, Dan. I'm okay. I'll get by. But yeah, it's just, you know, like, I think this is just like me, and I'll say this when we talk about talk about 19 in a few minutes, or well, it won't be it'll be a few minutes for us, not for you guys. Depending on how Dan releases these. But you know, I'm just kind of pleading with Spencer and with Marvel and editorial, like you got to move on the story, guys. You know what I mean? Let's get the action going. You know, so that's my final piece on it, Dan. So I mean, anything else you want to say about this issue?
Just two quick notes. I thought that the final line, "At least nobody's laughing," to be like so incredibly brutal for this character.
Yeah.
And then the other note I wanted to mention is, like, there's a point where the bullies are like picking on the Gibbon in these flashbacks, which are wonderfully rendered by Eric Archinega, the colorist, who kind of does this kind of Ben-Day dot textures to signal like kind of like, you know, Bronze Age, Silver Age comics, where they're picking on the Gibbon about his father, and he gets very defensive about his father. And to me, it implied like, is the Gibbon's father actually like a primate of some kind? Like, you know, we've never really gotten information on why Martin Blank looks the way he does. But by bringing up his lineage, it made me think perhaps there is something there. I don't think we'll ever find out. Right. But, you know, it seemed deliberate to me.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a good point too. Yeah, interesting stuff for this character. I mean, I'm glad that we got this time with this character. You know, it was nice to not like, because it was funny, we were talking about, when did we last see the Gibbon? And I think they even referenced it at one point in this issue. Like, I forgot what series it was, but it was some B book where like him and the Grizzly, and they were in the Grizzly mobile. I mean, like, you know, it's been so campy, and like to not have this be camp was really refreshing for me.
I mean, I'm not going to be laughing at the Gibbon anymore.
No, definitely not.
You know, like, he's a real character for me now. Absolutely. So let's do grades. Mark, what's your grade on this book? Oh,
God, this is such a tough book for me to grade, Dan. I'll give it a B+ based on just the merits of the story itself, but holding back because of my other issues that I discussed here. What about you?
I'm at a B+ too.
Okay.
I think it's one of my favorite issues of this story so far.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, thanks again for joining us for our review roundup episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. We've got a ton of great content coming down the pike for you all. Thanks again to Alan Schurstel for joining me for those two reviews as our first guest replacement for Mark. Not that anyone could ever replace you, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. You're so great. Oh, we love you, Alan. Oh. Anyway, Dan, what's coming up next for our listeners? And will I be there for part of it?
Well, Mark, I promise you'll be there for, because this was the episode that you put out there into the world and are making me kind of do a lot of homework for. So speaking of which, we wanted to give everyone a little bit of time to dive deep into the Marvel team-up issues, because we're talking about issues 1 through 70, which aren't exactly available for anybody anywhere. Yeah. But hopefully some of you guys have the ability to read some Marvel team-up issues, because we're going to be discussing that series from a helicopter view on our next regular episode of the show, and it's about time. But, like, I wanted to say, like, don't worry if you haven't read all 70 of those. Again, it's going to be a helicopter view. If you just know about Marvel Team Up, you should be fine for joining us.
No, I'm going to quiz everyone about Spider-Man's team up with the Frankenstein monster, Dan. So be forewarned.
I'm looking forward to it because I'm reading these issues for actually the first time. So I'll kind of bring that layperson's view to this next episode.
Meanwhile, our Patreon subscribers should be sure to check out our Patreon page and your podcast feed this week, where we've already got special reviews of the entire Nick Spencer run up through issue number 22. Why wait to get caught up in a few months? Remember, for just $3.99 a month, the price of a new comic, you'll get access to our exclusive new issue reviews, B-book reviews, extended interviews, mailbags, and more. And for $10 or more a month, you'll get access to some awesome commissioned artwork, this time from Barry Kitson.
And that artwork should be coming out pretty soon if Barry can hit the timeline on that. So I'm excited to showcase that to all of our Patreon subscribers. But in the meantime, why not check out the Untold Talks of Spider-Man? It's our sister podcast that's covering all the hidden corners of Spider-Man's complicated web of stories. And if you need some friends to kind of help you through all of that, why not check out the amazing Spider Slack community? It's like our app forum that you can chat with all of our spider friends, just from our very own community. There's a link to the community in the episode's description. We hope you'll come and join us. It's honestly some of the most fun I have talking about Spider-Man when I'm not with Mark.
Awesome, Dan. So beyond the Spider Slack, where else can we find you?
Yeah, I'm also on Twitter at @SupSpiderTalk, talking about Spider-Man all the live long day. Much to the chagrin of my coworkers. It's all kinds of crazy on Twitter. What about you, Mark?
You can find me on Twitter at ChasingASMblog, and you can always buy my book, 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die.
One of the things that opens your book is the motto that's come infamous in the Spider-Man community. Mark, what would I find if I peeled back the cover of that book?
Yes, Dan, you would find the very famous words of our great show, which is, with great podcasts must also come the all-new Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.